Section 1. The Radiation Theory, Springfield's Darkest Secret. Get comfortable, settle in, pull the blanket up a little higher, and let the noise of the day start to fade back. Because for the next couple of hours, we are going back to Springfield. Not the Springfield you think you know from the couch gag and the cheerful theme music and the bright yellow faces. We are going to the Springfield that lives underneath all of that. The one the show has been quietly, patiently, methodically constructing since December of 1989, one background detail at a time, one unexplained moment at a time, one thing you were not supposed to notice at a time. The Simpsons has been on the air for 36 seasons, 788 episodes. It is the longest-running American animated series, the longest-running American sitcom, and the longest-running scripted primetime show in the entire history of television. No asterisks. Nothing comes close. And in all of that time, across every season and every episode and every storyline and guest appearance and couch gag, not a single person in Springfield has aged even one day. Bart is still 10. Lisa is still 8. Maggie is still 1. Homer still works at the same nuclear power plant for the same ancient billionaire who cannot remember his name despite Homer working there for over 3 decades. The town has been struck by hurricanes and government-imposed containment domes and near-nuclear catastrophe, and by the following episode, everything is exactly as it was before. Tonight we are going to sit with that strangeness. We are going to resist the impulse to file it away as cartoon convention and instead ask a different question. What if it is not cartoon convention? What if the show has been telling a coherent and deeply unsettling story about its own town for 36 years, and we have been accepting the surface because nobody told us to look below it? We begin with the theory that explains more about Springfield in a single sentence than anything else ever proposed about this show. The Springfield nuclear power plant is not a setting device. It is the cause of everything wrong with this town. Biologically, chemically, neurologically. The plant is poisoning Springfield. It has always been poisoning Springfield. And the show has been telling you this since the 2nd season while expecting you to laugh at the punchlines and move past the implications. Let us take this slowly. The Springfield nuclear power plant is a 2-unit pressurized water reactor facility owned and operated by Charles Montgomery Burns. It is the primary source of electrical power for the entire community, meaning every residence and school and hospital and business in Springfield depends on this single facility. And this facility, measured against any reasonable industrial safety standard, is one of the most catastrophically and deliberately mismanaged operations in the history of fiction. A surprise safety inspection turned up 342 separate violations, 342 of them. The estimated cost to bring the plant up to code was $56 million. Burns refused, not because he could not afford it. Burns is a billionaire many times over. He refused because paying would mean acknowledging the violations existed, and acknowledging the violations would mean someone might start asking questions about what those violations had already done to the people living in the plant's shadow for the preceding decades. The violations are not administrative oversights. The show depicts them directly. Radioactive waste dumped into local waterways, radioactive material deposited onto a children's playground, plutonium rods used as desk paperweights, cracked cooling towers sealed with chewing gum, luminous rats running freely through the facility's infrastructure, and then there is the detail the show drops in a single episode and never revisits. Human skeletons in the basement. Not one skeleton. Multiple human remains in the basement of an active nuclear power plant. The show shows you the bones and moves on. Nobody asks who those people were or how they ended up there. The safety inspector makes a note on his clipboard and continues walking. That safety inspector is Homer Simpson. Homer J. Simpson, a man whose creator has stated on record possesses an IQ of 55. A man who, in one episode, is revealed to have a crayon lodged in his brain since childhood, physically obstructing neural pathways. A man who sleeps at his workstation, who eats donuts during meltdown alarms, who, in one canonical episode, throws a donut into the reactor core to see what will happen. That specific person has been standing between the people of Springfield and radioactive catastrophe for over 30 years without interruption. Now here is where the evidence accumulates in a way that becomes very difficult to dismiss. The first visible mutation in Springfield appears in Season 2. A fish pulled from a river near the power plant has 3 eyes. 3 fully formed, functional eyes. The fish is named Blinky and immediately becomes a news event within the show. A gubernatorial candidate uses Blinky as evidence that Burns is poisoning the environment. Burns eats the fish on live television to prove it is safe. The town watches and moves on. Nobody tests the water. Nobody asks the question that should be unavoidable. If the fish in the river near this plant have developed a third eye from the radiation, what is happening inside the bodies of the people who have been drinking that water for decades? The show gives you an answer in Season 8 in an episode called The Springfield Files. Homer sees something in the woods near town, a glowing humanoid figure moving through the trees with an unsteady, euphoric gait, emanating visible light. The FBI is called. The mystery builds. And the reveal is this. The glowing figure is Mr. Burns. Burns undergoes a weekly medical treatment so saturated with radiation and experimental compounds that after each session his body emits a visible green glow. The treatment keeps him alive for exactly 1 more week. Without it, he dies. He wanders out of the treatment facility in a dazed state and moves through the woods because that is where his body takes him. He glows in the dark. Not metaphorically. His skin radiates visible light because of the concentration of radioactive material his body has been saturated with. And the people of Springfield see this glowing humanoid figure moving through the trees and conclude it must be an alien from outer space, not a person. Not someone connected to the nuclear facility that has dominated their skyline for decades, an alien. That is how completely the town has been conditioned not to connect what it sees to what the plant is doing. In the Simpsons movie, the contamination reaches a point so severe that the Environmental Protection Agency determines Springfield must be physically sealed under a massive glass dome to prevent its pollution from spreading to the surrounding region. Not fined, not shut down, contained. The entire town classified as an environmental hazard so dangerous that physical containment is the only viable solution. And every resident of Springfield is still inside when the dome goes up. Now look at the residents themselves. Homer has a skull shape that corresponds to no known human anatomy. 4 fingers on each hand, as does every other Springfield resident. Bulging eyes. An overbite of clinical significance. An IQ that qualifies as an intellectual disability by the creator's own statement. A body that absorbs and recovers from physical trauma that would be fatal to any real human being. He has been shot, electrocuted, dropped from heights, struck by vehicles, caught in explosions, and walks away from all of them. He has worked in direct proximity to an active reactor core for the entirety of his adult life. Marge has the same 4 fingers, the same bulging eyes, and hair that has maintained the exact same geometric structure for 36 years without product or visible physical support. She worked at the plant herself during a documented period of employment. All 3 Simpson children were conceived and born after both parents had already been living in Springfield's contaminated environment for significant time. Here is the detail that the art style explanation cannot account for. When characters from outside Springfield visit the town, they look observably different from Springfield residents. Slightly more naturalistic proportions, eyes that fall slightly closer to recognizable human anatomy, features that deviate less from what we understand as plausible human biology. The show does not render all characters identically. There is a systematic difference in how Springfield residents appear compared to visitors from elsewhere. Within the show's internal logic, that difference is a visible, observable fact about the world of the show. The people inside the contamination zone look different from the people who have not been exposed. Even the animals are affected. Santa's little helper has the same bulging eyes as his owners, the same proportional deviations from real canine anatomy. Blinky has 3 eyes. The wildlife around the plant is demonstrably, canonically mutated. The show tells you this directly. It shows you a 3-eyed fish and labels it as evidence of what the radiation is doing to living organisms. And then it asks you to believe that the same radiation, from the same source, in the same water supply, has produced 0 effect on the humans consuming it. Burns knows. The show makes this explicit across multiple episodes. He funds private medical research. He retains personal physicians. He undergoes weekly treatments that require radiation to sustain his own biological function. Burns understands radiation better than anyone in Springfield because his survival depends on its precise management in his own body. He has the pharmaceutical infrastructure, the research capacity, the decades of evidence. He knows what the plant is doing to Springfield because Springfield is, in the most literal sense, his laboratory. Homer's continued employment is not negligence. It is documented strategy. When German investors bought the plant, they fired Homer immediately. They then received the cost assessment for bringing the facility up to code and nearly went bankrupt from the estimate alone. Burns bought the plant back and rehired Homer on his first day of restored ownership. A competent safety inspector would initiate the regulatory processes that would shut the plant down within weeks. Homer's incompetence is not a liability Burns tolerates. It is the mechanism by which the violations continue unaddressed. The crayon episode is the final piece. Season 12 reveals that Homer once had the crayon removed. His intelligence expanded immediately and dramatically. He became articulate, analytical, capable of sophisticated reasoning. He looked at his job and understood it. He looked at his employer and recognized the relationship. He looked at his life and saw it clearly for the first time. And it was unbearable. So he chose to have the crayon reinserted. He chose to return to impairment. He chose not to know. But how did the crayon get there in the first place and remain undetected through decades of medical appointments? Either every doctor in Springfield is catastrophically incompetent, or the medical establishment is not independent of Burns's influence. If Burns's economic power extends into the healthcare infrastructure of the town he essentially owns, then the doctors who missed the crayon for decades may not have missed it. They may have left it where it was. Because a Homer with a crayon in his brain is, for Burns's purposes, infinitely more useful than a Homer without one. The radiation theory does not explain one mystery about the Simpsons. It explains all of them simultaneously from a single causal point. The characters do not age because the contamination has altered their biology at the cellular level. The town resets because the population's cognitive function cannot sustain long-term memory through the neurological damage it has sustained. Homer survives fatal injuries because his biology has adapted to radiation in ways that make him physically extraordinary while cognitively devastated. Burns stays alive because he has spent a century engineering the specific treatment protocol his altered body requires. And nobody asks the unavoidable questions because the same contamination that altered their bodies has damaged the neural architecture responsible for the critical thinking that would allow them to see what is happening. Springfield is a contamination zone. The residents are not eccentric characters in a cartoon, they are symptomatic people in a poisoned town. The yellow faces and the four fingers and the impossible recoveries and the forgotten disasters and the perpetual reset all trace back to the same cracked cooling tower, leaking the same invisible poison, feeding the same damaged population that cannot figure out why its fish have extra eyes and its children were born with the wrong number of fingers. The plant is the show. The contamination is the premise. And after 36 years, the show is still telling you this, one detail at a time, waiting for someone to finally put it together. If you are settling in for the night, drop a comment with where you are watching from and what time it is there. It is genuinely wonderful to know who is out there listening. And if you are enjoying this, subscribing is the easiest way to make sure there is always somewhere to go when you cannot sleep. Now, let us keep going. A deeper look. The plant, the person, and the pattern. Let us go slower through the radiation theory, because the full weight of it only lands when you understand how many separate threads of evidence point in the same direction simultaneously. The show's depiction of the plant's operational reality is not incidental. It is not window dressing. It is not background detail inserted to make the world feel lived in, without meaning anything beyond that function. The plant exists in the show the way a protagonist's job exists in a literary novel, not as setting but as argument. Every detail the show provides about the facility is a choice. Every choice builds toward something, and what it builds toward when you read the accumulation together is a portrait of deliberate, sustained, knowing contamination. Take the 342 violations. That number is specific enough to be credible and large enough to be overwhelming. A single violation in a nuclear facility is grounds for investigation. Dozens of violations constitute a crisis. 342 violations constitute something that exceeds the vocabulary of ordinary regulatory failure. This is not a facility that has been neglected. This is a facility that has been actively operated in defiance of every standard that exists to prevent it from destroying the community around it. The violations are not the result of budget constraints or insufficient technical expertise. Burns has the money and access to technical expertise. The violations exist because fixing them was never the priority. Keeping them invisible was the priority. and Homer was the mechanism by which they stayed invisible. Homer's specific suitability for the job of safety inspector at this specific facility is worth examining at length. The show provides abundant detail about Homer's cognitive profile across many episodes, and that profile, read in aggregate, describes exactly the kind of person Burns would need in this particular role. Homer cannot sustain attention for long periods. He cannot connect a current observation to a previous pattern to produce a conclusion about systematic failure. He cannot read technical documentation with comprehension. He cannot remember, from one shift to the next, the state of systems he observed the previous day. He cannot distinguish between a problem that has existed for months and a new development that requires immediate reporting. He does not ask follow-up questions. He does not pursue an anomaly once he has moved past it. He does not have the cognitive architecture necessary to recognize that the three-eyed fish, and the luminous rats, and the cracked cooling towers, and the human skeletons in the basement are not separate unrelated incidents but a single coherent pattern with a single coherent explanation. This is not an accident of casting. When Burns regained the plant from the German investors, he did not interview candidates for the safety inspector role. He rehired Homer specifically. He rehired the specific person whose specific cognitive profile makes him the ideal non-inspector. The German investors' instinct to fire Homer was correct. A competent person in that role would generate the kind of regulatory attention that would shut the plant down. Burns understood this when he got his plant back. His first act of restored ownership was to ensure the inspection function remained as non-functional as it had been before the Germans arrived. Now consider the town's response to Blinky. A three-eyed fish appears in the river near the power plant. A political candidate uses the fish as evidence of environmental contamination. Burns is forced to eat the fish on live television. The town watches, registers discomfort, and moves on. Nobody pursues the obvious follow-up question. The question is, if the fish in this river have developed a third eye from whatever the plant is putting into the water, what is the water doing to us? The answer to this question is available in the episode. The audience can see it because the audience is watching people whose physical characteristics deviate from any realistic standard of human biology. 4 fingers, yellow skin, overbites of clinical significance, skull shapes that do not correspond to known anatomical variation, an elderly man who claims to be 31, a baby whose intelligence cannot be measured by any standard instrument. These deviations are the answer to the question the town refused to ask. The fish have 3 eyes, and the people have 4 fingers, and the connection between these two facts is the plant, and nobody in Springfield has been able to make that connection for 36 years because the connection requires the kind of sustained analytical thinking that the contamination itself has compromised. The show uses the 4-finger detail in a way that is formally brilliant and thematically devastating. Every character in Springfield has 4 fingers, every single one. It is presented as an animation convention. Cartoon characters often have 4 fingers for production efficiency because animating a full hand is time-consuming and expensive relative to the visual return. The explanation every casual observer reaches for is that it is simply a stylistic choice. And at the production level, that is true. But within the show's own logic, within the frame of the world the show has constructed, there is a community of people with 4 fingers who live next to a nuclear facility with 342 safety violations, and the production explanation does not exist within the world of the show. Within the world of the show, the 4 fingers are the 4 fingers. They are a physical characteristic shared by every person who lives inside the contamination zone. Visitors have 5. Residents have 4. The difference is geographic and therefore environmental and therefore causal. The plant is the cause. The fingers are the evidence. And the skin, the yellow skin that covers every Springfield resident and has always been treated as simply the show's color palette, its visual signature, the aesthetic choice that makes The Simpsons immediately recognizable. Yellow skin, within the established framework of medical biology, is associated with jaundice, a condition arising from elevated bilirubin levels, often indicating liver dysfunction, which can itself be caused by long-term exposure to environmental toxins. The show chose yellow skin. Yellow skin, in real-world medical terms, is a symptom. The show gave its entire contaminated population the color of a symptom, and then it presented the symptom as a style choice and waited to see who noticed. Burns sees the residents of Springfield differently from how they see themselves. He knows they are symptomatic. He knows the symptoms are his doing. He knows that the reason Homer cannot think clearly enough to do his job is connected to the same contamination that keeps Blinky swimming in the river with 3 eyes. He knows this because he is managing the same contamination in his own body through a precisely calibrated weekly protocol that he has maintained for decades. He is not merely adjacent to this situation. He is its architect. He built the plant. He chose not to fix the violations. He hired Homer. He kept Homer. He knows what the plant is doing, and he has made every relevant decision with full awareness of what the plant is doing. The contamination of Springfield is not the unintended consequence of industrial operations. It is the operating environment that Burns has chosen to maintain. The plant is working exactly as Burns needs it to work, which is to say, it is poisoning the town. The town is impaired. The impaired town is unable to challenge the plant. Burns runs the plant indefinitely, and the cycle continues. What makes this theory so difficult to set aside is that it does not require any single piece of evidence to carry more weight than it can reasonably support. The strength of the argument is not any one observation, but the accumulation of all of them pointing simultaneously in the same direction. The 342 violations, the cracked cooling towers, the radioactive waste on the playground, the luminous rats, the human skeletons, the 3-eyed fish, the 4 fingers, the yellow skin, the IQ of 55, the crayon, the undetected crayon, Homer's continued employment through deliberate strategy, the green glow that the town reads as alien because reading it as radiation would require admitting the source, the government dome over a federally designated environmental hazard zone with the entire population still inside. Every one of these details was written into the show by writers who knew what they were writing. They were not accumulating them unconsciously. They were building something. And what they built, if you are willing to follow it to its conclusion, is a picture of Springfield so complete and so coherent and so dark that the comedy on top of it functions almost as camouflage. The jokes are so good that you watch them and laugh and move on. The show is banking on your willingness to laugh and move on. Because the moment you stop and look at the accumulation, the camouflage fails. And what you see underneath is not a cartoon town. It is a contamination zone. And the people inside it are not quirky characters. They are patients who do not know they are patients, cared for by no one, monitored by no one, in a facility with 342 violations, and a safety inspector with an IQ of 55, and an employer who has no interest in fixing any of it. Number. Section 2. The Homer Coma Theory. A dream that never ended. Everything we just examined might only exist inside the mind of a man who has been unconscious since the spring of 1993. That is the Homer Coma Theory. It is the single most widely discussed, most thoroughly examined, most internally consistent fan theory in the history of this show. The show's executive producers have acknowledged it publicly. The show itself has referenced it within canon. It has a specific date, a specific narrative trigger, and an internal logic so complete that it does something no official explanation of the show's structure has ever achieved. It makes all of The Simpsons make sense as a unified object. April 1st, 1993, the 18th episode of the show's 4th season. So, it's come to this, a Simpsons clip show. Bart plays a series of April Fool's pranks on Homer, each escalating beyond the last, until he takes one of Homer's beer cans to an auto body shop and shakes it inside an industrial paint mixer. When Homer opens the can, the explosive force sends him to the hospital. Homer is placed in a bed. He sees a vending machine across the room, gets up to retrieve a snack, the machine tips over and lands on him. Homer flatlines. Homer enters a coma. This is not presented as a joke or a cutaway. Within the episode's reality, Homer Simpson is clinically unconscious. The episode appears to end with Homer waking up. Bart confesses at his bedside. Homer grabs Bart's neck. The family laughs. The show tells you he woke up. The music is cheerful. The format reasserts itself. Everything is fine. Except the episode also tells you, in its final moments, that during the coma, Homer lost 5% of his brain function permanently. The cells are dead. The function will not return. And Homer's response to being told he has sustained permanent, irreversible brain damage is to laugh uncontrollably while saying he does not understand why he is laughing. The family finds this charming. Nobody finds it alarming. The episode ends. The coma theory says Homer never woke up. The vending machine landed on Homer Simpson on April 1, 1993, and every episode since is a dream. The ongoing, deteriorating, increasingly unstable dream of an unconscious man lying in a hospital bed while his family sits beside him and waits. The evidence begins with the tonal shift. Before the coma episode, The Simpsons was a grounded show. Not realistic exactly, but emotionally rooted in recognizable human problems. Homer trying to stop drinking, Marge questioning her marriage, Lisa developing a complicated first crush, Bart facing real academic consequences. These are domestic anxieties, financial stress, marital tension, academic failure told through comedy. The emotional core was built on recognition. The audience knows these pressures from their own lives. After the coma episode, the show becomes something different almost immediately. Homer goes to space. Mr. Burns captures the Loch Ness Monster. Homer joins a secret society. Homer discovers his mother is a fugitive radical. Homer meets God, then meets God again. He travels to dozens of countries, holds hundreds of different jobs, befriends presidents and celebrities, and survives physical trauma that would neutralize a platoon of soldiers. The show goes from domestic anxiety to something with no relationship to any recognizable version of ordinary family life. The internet has debated when The Simpsons declined for 20 years without consensus. The coma theory offers a precise answer. The show did not decline. Homer's brain got worse. What the audience reads as escalating absurdity is, within the theory, the natural progression of a deteriorating unconscious mind. The early post-coma episodes are relatively stable because the brain is still relatively intact. The later seasons become progressively more surreal and disconnected because the mind generating the dream continues to lose function. The escalation is not creative decline. It is neurological decline expressed through narrative. 6 months before the coma episode, in Homer the Heretic, Homer has a direct face-to-face conversation with God. Within the episode's reality, this is not metaphor or hallucination. God tells Homer that he will understand the meaning of life, but not yet. He frames it temporally. Homer's time is coming. 6 months later, the vending machine falls and Homer's conscious life ends. The coma theory reads the Homer the Heretic conversation as prophecy embedded in the show 6 months before the event it predicts. God was telling Homer that his waking life was approaching its end. 6 months later, it was. The aging problem is where the coma theory distinguishes itself most clearly from every other explanation. Nobody in The Simpsons ages. The floating timeline, the narrative arrangement by which the show's present is always the viewer's present and the characters remain at fixed ages has been in place since the beginning. The radiation theory says the aging freeze is biological. The coma theory says nobody ages because they exist inside the frozen mind of a man who lost consciousness in April of 1993. Homer's coma brain cannot age his children because he was not there to witness their growing up. His memory of Bart is of a 10-year-old boy. His memory of Lisa is of an 8-year-old girl with a saxophone. His memory of Marge is of the woman she was on the day the machine fell. His memory of Maggie is of an infant. The dream cannot update these images because updating them would require information Homer's coma did not provide. The characters are frozen not because the show needs them to be, but because Homer's unconscious mind can only construct the versions of his family that existed the last time he knew them clearly. Dreams do not age the people you love. When you dream about someone you have not seen in years, you dream them as they were when you last held them in your memory. Your parents look the way they looked when you were young if that is the version living deepest in your recollection. Homer's coma dream keeps his family at the ages they were when he last held them in conscious experience. Not because the dream is stuck, because that is all the dream has to work with. The celebrity appearances that saturate the later seasons are explained by the coma theory with a specificity other accounts cannot match. Homer's unconscious brain is receiving ambient stimuli from the room around it. A television at low volume, voices in the hallway, music from a radio, cultural noise filtering through the fog of unconsciousness and being processed by a brain that cannot contextualize it accurately, so it incorporates this material into the dream as characters. Every celebrity who ever showed up in Springfield is a name or a voice Homer heard through the fog of his coma, translated by the dreaming mind into a figure it could place in the familiar landscape of his town. Springfield did not become a celebrity magnet. Homer's brain started absorbing famous people from the hospital room's ambient media environment and placing them in the dream, because that is what the unconscious does with fragments of sound it cannot fully process. The show's engagement with the theory directly is itself revealing. In season 34, the show produced a fully animated, fully voiced sequence depicting Homer waking from a long coma, complete with the reveal that every unusual episode was a dream. They then retracted it, calling it a fake scene planted by hackers. Think about what the writers actually did. They sat down and wrote a coma wake-up scene. They paid animators to produce it. They paid voice actors to perform it. They released it and then said it was a lie. They made the scene the coma theory predicts and then called it false, which is, if you want to sit with the irony, precisely what Homer's coma dream does to him every episode. It shows him a version of his life and tells him it is real. Al Jean addressed the theory in 2015 and said it was not true. He did not explain why nobody ages. He did not explain the tonal shift. He did not explain the God conversation from Homer the heretic placed 6 months before the coma. He said it is not true and the conversation moved on, which is exactly how Springfield handles inconvenient truths. Here is what stays with you after the thread closes. If the coma theory is true, the emotional core of The Simpsons is not comedy. It is something quieter and more fundamental. It is grief, and it is love, and it is the one thing about Homer Simpson that everyone who has ever watched the show understands even without articulating it. Homer's deepest wish is the simplest wish a person can have. He wants his family. He wants Marge to still love him. He wants Bart to still be his mischievous little boy. He wants Lisa to still be playing saxophone in her room, still fighting the world with her ideas. He wants Maggie to still be small enough to hold. He wants the house on Evergreen Terrace to still be full. In the coma, all of that is permanent. The dream gives Homer everything he wants. His children never grow old. His wife never leaves. His life never ends. Every disaster resets because his unconscious mind will not allow the dream to conclude in catastrophe. Every episode returns to the couch and the family together because that is what the dream is for. His brain refuses to let the story end. Because if the story ends, the dream stops. And if the dream stops, Homer has to wake up. And waking up means learning how much time has passed, how old his children really are now, whether Marge waited, whether anyone is still sitting in the chair beside his bed, or whether there is no longer a chair at all. Homer's coma is not a nightmare. It is the only form of heaven a man like Homer Simpson would ever think to ask for. A house where the kids are always young and the beer is always cold, and Friday evening always comes and the family always ends up on the couch together. And every episode since April of 1993 is a love letter. A sleeping man addressing his family in the only language available to him, sending them warmth and continuity and the constant assurance that everything is fine, because in his dream he is making sure of it. The coma theory does not ruin The Simpsons. It makes every episode an act of love. A father dreaming about his family because they are the only thing worth dreaming about. And every time Homer survives something impossible, every time the world resets, every time the credits roll and everything goes back to normal, it is Homer's brain refusing to let the story end. Because if the story ends, the dream stops. And Homer is not ready to stop. Because stopping means finding out what is real. And the real world, the one outside the dream, is the one where a vending machine fell on him in a hospital hallway and he never quite came back from it. The dream in detail. What the coma theory actually predicts. The coma theory is most commonly summarized in a single sentence. Homer is dreaming. Everything since 1993 is the dream and then left there. But the theory is more precise than a summary makes it sound, and the precision is where it becomes genuinely haunting. Consider what the theory predicts about the structure of the dream, in specific, testable terms. If Homer went into a coma in April of 1993, after sustaining what the show itself describes as a 5% permanent reduction in brain function, then the dream he generates should have predictable characteristics. It should begin relatively stable, because the brain generating it is relatively intact. It should become progressively more unstable over time, as the underlying brain continues to deteriorate. It should incorporate ambient material from the hospital environment as external stimulation filtered through unconscious processing. It should preserve the people Homer loves in the forms he last knew them, because the unconscious cannot update its models without new conscious experience to draw from. It should loop and reset, because a dreaming brain does not experience linear time the way a waking brain does. And it should become increasingly surreal and disconnected from any recognizable version of ordinary reality as the cognitive scaffolding that keeps the dream coherent begins to fail. Now compare this prediction list to the actual trajectory of The Simpsons as a television series. Season 5 begins to show the show stretching toward larger-scale premises. Seasons 6 and 7 are widely considered the creative peak, ambitious but still emotionally grounded. Season 8 and 9 introduce increasingly fantastical elements while maintaining some connection to the domestic core. Season 10 through 15 accelerate the departure from recognizable reality. The later seasons become progressively more surreal, more dependent on celebrity cameos and high-concept premises, less interested in the emotional authenticity that defined the early run. The escalation is not a straight line, but it is a direction. And that direction, from grounded to surreal, from emotionally precise to increasingly disconnected, maps precisely onto what a deteriorating dream brain should produce. The celebrity cameos that multiply so dramatically in the later seasons are particularly telling under the theory. In the early seasons, celebrity appearances are relatively rare and tend to be integrated meaningfully into episodes. In the later seasons, the show becomes famous partly for its endless parade of famous faces dropping into Springfield, for episodes that often feel like the celebrity appearance is the premise rather than a component of a story. The coma theory explains this with a specific mechanism. The longer Homer is in the coma, the more ambient media material his brain has absorbed from the hospital environment, and the more heavily that material influences what the dream produces. The early dream is generated primarily from Homer's internal memory and imagination. The later dream is increasingly assembled from fragments of external media television programs, conversations at the bedside, music from a radio filtered through a brain that can no longer fully distinguish between what it remembers and what it is receiving. Every celebrity in the later seasons is someone Homer heard about without being able to see. A name mentioned in a conversation he could not follow. A voice from a television he could not watch. An image described in words by whoever sat beside his bed. These fragments enter the dream, and the dream does what dreams do with fragments. It places them in the familiar landscape and gives them roles that make sense to the narrative the dream is telling. The dream does not know these people. It only knows what it has received through the fog of unconsciousness. So they arrive in Springfield as slightly off versions of themselves present, recognizable by name, but not quite fully realized in the way the characters the dream actually knows from memory are fully realized. Which is, now that you think about it, exactly how celebrity guest appearances tend to function in the show's later seasons. The 5% of brain function that the show explicitly states Homer lost during the coma is load-bearing in the theory. 5% of a brain is a significant amount of neural tissue. Depending on where it was located, the loss could affect memory consolidation, executive function, emotional regulation, the capacity for abstract reasoning, or any number of cognitive operations that are not visible in Homer's day-to-day behavior, but that shape the structure of what his unconscious mind can produce. The crayon is the other piece of this. Homer already had his intelligence structurally limited by the foreign object in his brain before the coma. The coma adds permanent damage on top of the pre-existing limitation. The dream being generated by this brain is not the dream of an ordinary mind. It is the dream of a mind that was already operating below its natural capacity, reduced further by trauma, and now running a simulation of an entire world with whatever resources it has left. And yet the dream keeps running. Whatever Homer's brain has left, it is devoted entirely to keeping this one story going. The story of his family, the story of the house on Evergreen Terrace, the story of Friday evenings and Sunday mornings and a life that is imperfect and frustrating and full of his own failures, but that contains his wife and his children and is therefore worth maintaining at any cognitive cost. Homer's brain is a failing system running one last program, and the program it is running is his family. That is what the dreaming mind chose to spend its remaining resources on, not on anything grand or abstract or cosmic, just on keeping his family together and close and unaged and safe in a Springfield that resets after every disaster because his brain will not permit the simulation to arrive at an ending that takes them away from him. The love at the center of the coma theory is not sentimental. It is architectural. It is the reason the dream has the shape it has. Every reset, every impossible recovery, every forgotten catastrophe, every celebrity who shows up and then leaves, every season that goes on a little longer than it should, all of it is the expression of a single underlying imperative. Keep the family together. Keep them young. Keep the house full. Keep going. Homer is still in that hospital bed. The vending machine fell in April of 1993 and he has never quite come back from it. But his mind, damaged and limited and slowly losing function, is still trying, still building Springfield every day, still keeping Marge there and Bart mischievous and Lisa playing saxophone and Maggie watching, still refusing to let the story arrive at its natural conclusion. Because the story's natural conclusion is the one Homer cannot bear, the one where the children are grown and gone, the one where the house is quiet, the one where the family he has been dreaming about for 30 years is older now than the last time he knew them, and he has missed all of it. His brain will not build that story. It will keep building the other one instead, for as long as it can. Number. Section 3. Who really shot Mr. Burns, the case that was never actually solved? The official answer is, Maggie did it. Season 7, Episode 1, Who Shot Mr. Burns, Part 2, Case Closed, Baby did it. Move on. Except the case was never actually closed, because the evidence does not hold together the way the show wants you to believe it does. And the more carefully you examine what the show presents as the solution, the more the official verdict looks less like a conclusion the evidence demanded and more like a decision that was made because it was the most convenient one available. Go back to Season 6, Episode 25. Summer of 1995, The Simpsons was at the apex of its cultural influence. The creative team did something no animated program had attempted before. A genuine whodunit mystery with real suspects, real clues, and a national contest inviting viewers to solve it. Fox treated the event like a cultural happening. America's Most Wanted produced a companion special. The question of who shot Mr. Burns was treated by Fox's promotional apparatus as a genuine unsolved case deserving public collective analysis. The setup was meticulous. Burns had systematically wronged every named character in Springfield. He stole an oil well from beneath Springfield Elementary, collapsing the school budget. He drove Moe's Tavern into bankruptcy. He created a sinkhole that destroyed the retirement castle. He injured Santa's little helper, and for his final act, he built a device to block the sun from the entire community so every resident would be forced to buy electricity from his plant around the clock. He stole the sun from Springfield for profit. When Smithers objected, Burns fired him, and by the time the town gathered at a public meeting to confront Burns directly, every single named character had a concrete, specific, personal grievance. Homer, because Burns has never once remembered his name despite years of employment. Bart and Lisa, because their school lost its programs. Grandpa, because his retirement home was destroyed. Groundskeeper Willie, because his job was eliminated. Tito Puente, because the music program was cut. Moe, because his livelihood was taken. Smithers, freshly fired after a career of total devotion. Then Burns collapsed, a single gunshot. He staggered to the town sundial and fell, his hands landing on the letters W and S as viewed from the front, or M and S from Burns's own perspective. Ambulance. Screen goes black. America Waited All Summer. Part 2. September 1995. Smithers immediately confesses, but his confession collapses. When it emerges, he was blackout drunk and actually shot Jasper in the wooden leg at a different location. Suspects are eliminated one by one. An eyelash on Burns's suit. DNA identifies it as belonging to a Simpson. Homer is arrested. Then Burns wakes from his coma, looks around, and names his shooter, Maggie. In the parking lot after the meeting, Burns tried to take her lollipop. His gun fell from its holster. Maggie picked it up. The gun fired. Here are the specific problems with this answer. The contest. Fox told America the mystery was solvable from the evidence in Part 1. The contest was built on this premise. Thousands of entries were submitted. According to the DVD commentary, not a single entry from the randomly selected sample correctly identified Maggie as the shooter. The prize winner was chosen randomly from incorrect entries and received a cash payment because no correct answer was found. The show's writers were aware of one person who posted the correct answer online on the night of the first broadcast, using a college account that had since been deactivated. They could not find this person. An open invitation was issued on the DVD release for this person to come forward. As far as anyone knows, they never did. What this means is straightforward. The show told America the mystery was solvable, built a national event around public participation in solving it, and when the answer was revealed, essentially nobody had solved it. Either the clues were insufficient to guide viewers to Maggie, or the answer does not follow from the evidence as cleanly as advertised. The sundial. Burns's hands land on W and S, or M and S from his perspective. The show reads this as Maggie Simpson's initials, but Burns stated within the episode that he did not deliberately position his hands on those letters. He fell. The letters were accidental. The central piece of physical evidence the show uses to justify its answer was explicitly described by the victim as coincidental. The most famous clue in the mystery is meaningless according to the person it supposedly came from. The gun. Burns carried a weapon in a holster. The holster is shown empty before the shooting. Burns had already lost his gun before he was shot. The shooter did not bring their own weapon. They used Burns's gun, which they found or acquired separately. This profile matches Maggie's account. It also matches every other unarmed person who was in the vicinity that evening. Burns's last words before being shot were, "Oh, it's you." He recognized his attacker. He was not surprised. He was not afraid. He said it in the tone of someone acknowledging a familiar presence who does not represent a threat. Has Burns ever had a meaningful interaction with Maggie Simpson before this episode? The show has not established a relationship between them. Burns barely recognizes Homer, and Homer works for him. The idea that Burns would see an infant and respond with calm, quiet recognition does not track with how Burns relates to people of lesser social standing. Homer's confession in Season 18. Homer states on camera in a canonical episode that he was the one who shot Burns. He says it plainly. The show does nothing with it. Nobody investigates. Homer confesses to the attempted murder of the wealthiest man in Springfield, and the show treats it as a throwaway line. Either Homer is lying for attention, which is consistent with his character, or the original verdict was wrong and Homer is telling the truth because he is the one who actually pulled the trigger. The Marge theory makes a compelling case. Marge had watched Burns destroy her children's school, injure her family's dog, and steal the sun from her community. She had more than sufficient motive. Burns had previously developed a fixation on Marge in the episode Marge Gets a Job, creating a dynamic in which Burns might, upon waking, choose not to name her as his attacker. He took the bullet, identified his shooter, and decided the woman he had once felt something for was not going to pay for what she did. He let the investigation point to the sundial, and the town drew its own conclusion. Maggie was the conclusion they chose, because, as Chief Wiggum stated on record, no jury in the world would convict a baby. The alternate endings confirmed the answer was selected from viable options rather than determined by the evidence. A complete, fully animated, fully voiced alternate conclusion was produced in which Smithers is the shooter. This was finished work, screened in a clip show episode where the host dismisses it by saying it would not have made sense because you would have had to ignore all that Simpson DNA evidence, which would be downright nutty. That phrase is a direct reference to the O.J. Simpson verdict, in which a jury reached a not guilty conclusion despite DNA evidence. The show is pointing at a real-world case where the official verdict and the physical evidence were misaligned and using it to comment on the Burns investigation. It is telling you that ignoring DNA evidence is something that happens, that official verdicts are not always what the evidence demands. Early drafts had Barney Gumble as the intended shooter. Multiple answers were live at different points in the creative process. The clues were adjusted after the answer was chosen. The mystery was reverse-engineered. The evidence was arranged to support a conclusion already selected, which means the evidence does not independently lead to Maggie. It was arranged to appear to do so. The Burns shooting case was not solved in 1995. It was closed. The investigation produced an answer nobody would contest and nobody would reopen, a verdict carrying no legal consequence. In Springfield, that is what a solved case looks like. And in Springfield, as we have established, solved and closed are two very different things that the town has learned to treat as identical. The final shot of Part 2 shows Maggie alone in the room after everyone has left. She looks around carefully to confirm she is unobserved. Then, she moves her pacifier in a gesture that precisely mimics pulling a trigger. The show wants you to read this as confession. Maggie knows what she did, but a baby who was present when a gun was fired, who watched someone else pull the trigger, who is now alone and repeating the motion she witnessed the way infants do when they process sensory experiences, that baby's solo reenactment might not be confession at all. It might be memory. A witness processing what she witnessed by repeating what she observed. The image is deliberately ambiguous. The show chose to present it as confirmation. Whether it actually is confirmation is a question the evidence never quite closes. Number. Section 4. Mr. Burns and the Secret of Immortality. Charles Montgomery Burns should not be alive. Not as a moral statement, as a biological fact within the show's own established logic. Burns is over 100 years old by the most conservative accounting. The show has placed his memories in contexts suggesting first-hand experience of events from the late 1800s. He has described the Gilded Age not as historical reading, but as personal recollection. He has referenced relationships with people who died before the 20th century began. By the most conservative estimate, Burns is at least 100 years old. By a more generous reading of the show's continuity, he may be considerably older. And he does not simply exist, which would itself be extraordinary. He functions at an extraordinarily high level. He runs a multi-billion-dollar corporation with day-to-day operational awareness. He engages in municipal politics with sophisticated understanding. He designs and executes elaborate schemes requiring sustained cognitive effort, long-range planning, and current knowledge of modern technology, finance, and law. His body is failing in obvious ways. His physical strength is minimal. His frame is skeletal. His movement is slow, but his mind is precise. Burns is arguably the most strategically capable character in Springfield, operating with a calculated ruthlessness nobody in town can match, and he has been doing so for far longer than any human being has ever maintained sustained conscious function. The Springfield Files explains the survival mechanism. Burns undergoes a weekly medical treatment so intensive, so saturated with radiation and experimental compounds, that his body emits a visible green glow immediately afterward. The treatment sustains him for exactly 1 week. Miss the appointment, and Burns dies. The margin is precise and non-negotiable. His life is not maintained by any natural biological process. It is maintained artificially through a scheduled intervention that functions like mandatory servicing of a machine past its design lifespan. And the treatment involves radiation. The man who owns the facility responsible for contaminating Springfield's water supply is personally dependent on controlled radiation exposure to keep his own body functioning week to week. Burns is not profiting from radiation as a byproduct of owning the plant. Burns is powered by it. His biology has been so altered by a century of proximity to nuclear material that it can no longer sustain itself through ordinary cellular processes. He requires radiation input the way a normal human being requires food and water. Remove it and his system collapses within days. This is the framework within which the Three Stooges syndrome scene stops being simply a great joke and becomes something structurally important. Burns visits a doctor who informs him that he has contracted every known disease simultaneously, every single one at once. The doctor explains that this accumulation has produced a state of perfect equilibrium in which each disease is balanced against every other disease, so none of them can gain the dominance necessary to kill him. 3 people trying to squeeze through the same door simultaneously means none of them gets through. The diseases are all trying to kill Burns at once, and therefore none of them can progress far enough to succeed. It is played for comedy and it is very funny. But within the radiation framework, it is a precise description of what a body looks like when it has been maintained through artificial means for a very long time. The weekly treatments are not curing Burns's diseases, they are managing them, keeping every illness in exact stasis, calibrated and balanced, none permitted to progress, through the controlled application of radiation. Burns's body is a reactor. His treatments are the control mechanism. Remove the mechanism, and every disease surges simultaneously. The equilibrium collapses. Burns dies in ways too numerous to specify because everything that should have killed him over the past century all arrives at once. Smithers is the element of this system most easily underestimated. The depth of his devotion to Burns has been one of the show's most examined relationships, read variously as love and as obsession and as psychological dependency. All of those readings have validity. But the radiation framework adds a dimension the purely emotional reading misses. Smithers manages Burns's treatment schedule. Smithers ensures Burns makes every weekly appointment without exception. Smithers monitors Burns's physical condition with the vigilance of someone who understands precisely what a missed session would mean. The show has established repeatedly that if Smithers were removed from his position, Burns would be physically helpless. Without Smithers managing the logistics of the treatment protocol, Burns would miss a dose. Missing a dose means the equilibrium fails. Every disease surges simultaneously. Burns dies within the week. Smithers is devoted to Burns in part because he is the only person who fully understands the consequences of his own departure. He knows that leaving is not a resignation, it is an execution. His presence is keeping a man alive. His loyalty, whatever its emotional roots, is functionally a medical necessity. Burns cannot really fire him, because firing Smithers is suicide. And Burns has spent a very long time working very hard not to die. Burns's engagement with history creates a kind of temporal vertigo when you try to map it. He has described personal experience spanning from the late 19th century to the present day. He knew Howard Hughes. He attended Yale when the institution was substantially different from its current form. He served in World War II in a morally compromised capacity and acquired a $1 trillion bill from the United States government during the war and kept it hidden for decades. He describes the Gilded Age not as something he read about, but as something he inhabited. His family's wealth predates the Industrial Revolution. The Burns dynasty, as the show depicts it, extends back centuries, not as a family that became wealthy through any particular modern achievement, but as a lineage of ancient, uninterrupted power. The question the show raises without answering, is Burns unique in his family's history? The dynasty has maintained its concentration of power across generations for longer than most American institutions have existed. Ordinary generational succession cannot explain that kind of continuity. It requires either extraordinary luck at every point of transition or some systematic mechanism for extending the productive lifespan of whoever holds the position. Before nuclear radiation, before modern medicine, before any of the technology that currently sustains Burns, what sustained the dynasty? The show does not say, but it establishes the multi-generational continuity as fact and leaves you to wonder what maintained it through the centuries before a nuclear power plant was available to lean on. Burns has encountered death many times across the show's run. He has been shot, he has been hospitalized more times than can be counted. He has been poisoned, abandoned in conditions that should be fatal for a man of his physical condition, attacked by various means, and every time he comes back, not through the cartoon resilience Homer displays. Homer endures damage and heals. Burns comes back through infrastructure, through the machinery of wealth deployed to recover a specific body whose continuation is the purpose of the entire system surrounding it. The most disturbing dimension of Burns's immortality is not personal. It is what Springfield's relationship to the possibility of his death actually is. The town depends on the power plant. The plant depends on Burns. The employment and the electricity and the entire material infrastructure of daily life in Springfield is a function of Burns's continued operation of the facility. Remove Burns, and the town faces economic collapse. The contamination continues without the payroll. Springfield cannot turn on Burns, because Springfield cannot survive without him. And Burns cannot die because dying would mean the system he built would face accountability for the first time. The system is not designed to face accountability. It is designed to persist. He is not immortal. He is something more specific and more disturbing than immortal. He is too expensive to die. Springfield will keep paying the bill for as long as Burns keeps the lights on, which, if the treatment schedule holds and Smithers shows up every week, will be very close to forever. The reactor runs. The radiation leaks. The people stay yellow and four-fingered and cognitively impaired, just enough not to ask why. And Burns watches from his office window, glowing faintly, having outlived everyone who ever knew the truth about him, surviving on schedule, 1 week at a time, for as long as the system he built continues to function, which, in Springfield is to say, indefinitely. Number, Section 5. Maggie Simpson, the most capable person in Springfield. She has been 1-year-old for 36 years. She cannot walk reliably. She communicates through pacifier sounds and an expressiveness in her eyes that most adults in the show cannot match with full command of language. She has never delivered a sustained, spoken sentence in the canonical run of the series. She exists, in most episodes, as the background, the youngest, the smallest, the one the story orbits around without centering on. And she has accomplished more than every other member of her family combined. She shot a billionaire. She led a successful rebellion against a tyrannical daycare administrator. She saved her family from multiple life-threatening situations in which the adults around her were completely ineffective. She demonstrated problem-solving capabilities that would be impressive in a trained adult professional. She was formally measured and found to possess intelligence that should not exist in a pre-verbal infant. And through all of it, every remarkable thing she has done, she has said nothing. Not because she cannot speak, because she has decided not to. Let us start with the shooting. because it defines her in the public imagination, even though it is, honestly, the least interesting thing about her. We have already examined the question of whether she actually fired the gun. Whatever the truth of that parking lot encounter, the aftermath matters as much as the act. A baby was identified as the person who shot the wealthiest man in town. The evidence was examined. The official conclusion was that no legal consequence could follow because no jury would convict a baby. Case closed. But look at the final image of the episode after everyone has left the room. Maggie is alone. She looks left. She looks right. She confirms with deliberate care that nobody is watching. Then she moves her pacifier in a gesture that precisely mimics pulling a trigger. The show presents this as confession. Maggie knows what she did. But a baby who was present in the parking lot when the gun was fired, who watched someone else pull the trigger, who is now alone, and repeating the motion she witnessed the way infants process sensory experiences, by replicating them, that baby's solo reenactment might not be confession. It might be memory. A witness processing what she witnessed by repeating what she observed. She waited until she was alone. She checked her surroundings. Then she reenacted the motion in private. Which of those two readings you accept depends on what you already believe about Maggie. And what you believe about Maggie depends on whether you have been paying attention to her. The Longest Daycare, the Academy Award-nominated theatrical short from 2012, is the most sustained exhibition of Maggie's actual capabilities in anything the show has produced. 7 minutes. In it, Maggie is dropped at a daycare facility that assesses each child and assigns them to groups based on measured intelligence. Maggie tests as gifted. Inside the facility, she identifies a caterpillar forming a chrysalis and decides to protect it from another baby who wants to destroy it. What follows is Maggie systematically outmaneuvering the bully, the staff, and the physical layout of the facility using multi-step planning, environmental reading, prediction of other people's behavior, and real-time adaptation when initial approaches are blocked. She does all of this without words, without reliable motor control, while limited to the physical capabilities of a 1-year-old. She falls. She crawls when situations demand speed she cannot generate. Her body is a constant obstacle to the plans her mind is executing, and she succeeds anyway, because her intelligence compensates for every physical limitation imposed on her. Then she returns to exactly where she was placed when the adults left her, so that no one paying attention will know anything happened at all. That last part is the most important part, not the butterfly. The return to baseline, the restoration of the appearance of helpless passivity. Maggie makes sure the visible record of the event is her sitting quietly in her assigned spot, as if she has been there the whole time. The operation she conducted, the planning, the execution, the adaptation, the success, leaves no trace that an adult looking at her could identify as evidence of deliberate action. The film chose to end with Maggie actively concealing what she just did, because the concealment is the point. It is the most important thing about Maggie. The show has formally measured Maggie's intelligence in multiple episodes. The numbers vary between episodes, but the direction is consistent. Maggie consistently registers as extraordinary. The specific figures shift, but the pattern does not. A 1-year-old testing at a cognitive level that no instrument designed for infants was built to capture. The show presents each result as a quick joke and moves on. The accumulation forms something that is not a joke. It is a pattern. Documented, cross-episode, consistent, her silence is the central proposition of the theory. The silence is not developmental delay. It is strategy. Specifically, it is the strategy of someone intelligent enough to have observed the outcome of the alternative strategy and concluded that the alternative is not worth pursuing. Look at what Maggie has watched from her position in the Simpson household. She has watched Lisa, brilliant by any measure, the most academically capable person in Springfield by a significant margin, fight every single day for recognition and receive, as her consistent return on that effort, isolation, and dismissal. Lisa speaks up. Lisa raises her hand. Lisa presents evidence and makes arguments, and refuses to be quiet about what she knows. The community around her consistently responds by finding this exhausting, by acknowledging her intelligence as a fact, and then routing around it in every practical situation. Lisa's intelligence is her most visible quality, and it is the quality that most reliably prevents her from being welcomed into the social life of the town she lives in. Maggie observed this from her earliest days. She watched her sister's strategy of open, visible, vocal intelligence, and she watched the outcome of that strategy with precision. And she chose differently. She chose invisibility. She chose to present herself as exactly what everyone looking at her expects a baby to be. Quiet, passive, dependent, without interiority, without agenda, without anything going on behind those enormous eyes except the ordinary perceptual experience of an infant taking in the world. She is none of those things. She is the opposite of all of them. But the appearance is perfectly maintained, and maintaining it requires a level of self-awareness and self-control that most adults cannot sustain indefinitely. Maggie knows what she is doing. She knows she is not what she appears to be. She knows that appearing to be what she is would cost her the operational freedom she currently enjoys. She has made a calculation, and she executes it every day, every episode, every scene where she sits watching her family with those enormous eyes that absorb everything and give back almost nothing. Every time Maggie does something remarkable, the family does not notice. The Burns investigation looked at every adult suspect before reluctantly turning its attention to the infant, because adults do not seriously consider infants as actors in the world of adult consequence. The daycare rebellion succeeded because nobody monitors babies closely enough to recognize organized resistance when it forms. Every heroic intervention Maggie has made happened in the margins, in the spaces where the adults have decided nothing important is occurring. And Maggie has maintained access to those margins by making herself appear to be exactly the kind of person the adults have decided needs no monitoring. The radiation framework applied to Maggie produces something almost beautiful in its terrible symmetry. Homer's mutation diminished his intelligence to clinical impairment. Maggie's mutation amplified hers to a level the show cannot accurately measure. Same water, same air, same family, same plant, different outcomes. Homer is what the radiation takes away. Maggie is what the radiation gives, when it gives something extraordinary. Two sides of the same radioactive coin, separated by a generation and a flight of stairs. And if the coma theory is true, Maggie's genius takes on a quality that is very hard to look at directly. Homer cannot watch Maggie grow up. He cannot be there for her first real words, her first real decisions, her first real understanding of what she is capable of. He is asleep. He is missing it. So, in the dream, he makes her extraordinary in a way that does not require him to be there to protect her. He makes her capable of protecting herself and everyone she loves without needing her father. Her genius in the dream is Homer's way of releasing her into a version of Springfield she is equipped to handle without him. His way of ensuring that she will be okay even though he is not there to make sure of it. Her genius is not a mutation. It is a father's prayer expressed in the only language a coma leaves available. She is 1 year old. She cannot walk without falling. She is the most capable person on Evergreen Terrace. She has spent 36 years making certain that nobody realizes this. And behind those enormous quiet eyes, something is watching everything and storing it and waiting. The most unsettling thing about Maggie is not what she has done, it is what she is waiting to do, and how thoroughly she has ensured that nobody will see it coming. Number, Section 6. Mona Simpson and the Burns Conspiracy, 3 Generations of Damage. For the first 6 seasons of The Simpsons, Homer's mother was dead. Abe Simpson told Homer his mother had died when Homer was a child. He showed Homer a grave. Homer grew up with that loss as a foundational element of his identity, and that loss shaped everything Homer became. His desperate need for affirmation, his terror of abandonment, his clinginess toward Marge, his willingness to absorb humiliation and indignity from his employer rather than risk the one stable structure in his life. His compulsive need to be liked by everyone around him, even when being liked costs him his self-respect. Homer's personality, examined honestly, is a coping mechanism. Everything irritating and impulsive and destructive about him traces back to a 6-year-old boy who woke up one morning and found his mother was gone and was told she was never coming back. Season 7 revealed this entire foundation was a lie. The episode is Mother Simpson, November of 1995, and it is widely considered one of the greatest episodes the show has ever produced. Here is what happens. Homer fakes his own death to avoid a Saturday work obligation. When Marge insists he correct the resulting death certificate, Homer discovers at the Hall of Records that according to municipal records, his mother is alive. She has always been alive. The grave Abe showed him belongs to a poet named Walt Whitman. Abe had been directing his son to a famous writer's headstone and presenting it as his wife's burial site for the entirety of Homer's life. Homer finds Mona at a cemetery visiting what she believes is her son's grave, mourning the death the falling dummy had appeared to confirm. She does not recognize him at first. He has changed enormously in 27 years. When Homer proves who he is, they have a reunion that is among the most emotionally precise scenes the show has ever produced. And Mona tells Homer why she left. The story goes back to 1969. Mona was an ordinary Springfield housewife, married to Abe, mother to young Homer, living quietly while the world outside was in upheaval. Civil rights, Vietnam, the counterculture pressing against everything ordinary life had been built on. Something changed. She joined a group of activists targeting a biological weapons laboratory. Not a metaphorical enemy, an actual weapons facility. A laboratory owned by Charles Montgomery Burns, dedicated to the production of weaponized biological agents. Burns was manufacturing germ warfare compounds in Springfield, in the same town where Homer was growing up, where children played, where families went about their days with no knowledge that the richest man in their community was cooking diseases in a facility down the road. Mona and her group broke in. They deployed what the show describes as an antibiotic bomb designed to neutralize the biological agents stored inside. The raid succeeded. During the operation, they accidentally cured the asthma of the security guard, who turned out to be a young Clancy Wiggum, the man who would later become Springfield's chief of police, the same man who would declare, years later, that no jury in the world would convict a baby in the Burns shooting investigation. The threads of Springfield's history are wound through each other in ways that reveal the town's smallness and the reach of Burns's influence across every generation of it. As the group fled, Mona stopped. Someone had been knocked down in the chaos. She stopped to help them. The person was Mr. Burns. She helped the man whose weapons she had just destroyed, because she was the kind of person who stops to help someone even when every rational calculation argues against it. Burns looked up at her. He saw her face. He identified her. He reported her to the FBI. And from that moment, Mona Simpson was a fugitive. She could not go home. She could not call. She could not tell a 6-year-old boy that her absence had nothing to do with him, that she loved him, that she was not leaving because she wanted to leave or because there was anything wrong with him. She kissed Homer in his sleep and disappeared into the night. Homer woke up and his mother was gone. Abe told him she was dead, and Homer spent the next 27 years believing he was the kind of child a mother would rather die than raise. Think about what that belief does to a person over time. It becomes the lens through which everything else is interpreted. Every rejection confirms it. Every difficulty feels like further evidence. The foundational wound that makes Homer cling to Marge so desperately, that makes him absorb degradation from his employer rather than risk losing the income that keeps the family intact, that makes him need to be liked so badly he will do almost anything to achieve it. All of it traces back to a night in 1969 when he woke up and his mother was not there and was told she would never be there. Again, that night, shaped by Burns's vindictiveness, made Homer the person he became. When Mona finally returns to Springfield in the episode, Burns recognizes her almost immediately through a cab window. He contacts the authorities. The FBI arrives at the Simpson house. Mona has to flee again. Homer watches his mother leave for the second time in his life, and this time he understands. He knows why she left. He knows who forced her out. He knows that the man responsible for destroying his family is his employer, the man whose name he goes to work for every morning, the man who signs his paychecks. And Homer does not connect the dots in any consequential way. He returns to work. He continues drawing his salary from Burns. He does not confront him. He does not quit. He does not appear to fully process the relationship between the billionaire who made him motherless and the billionaire who currently employs him. Because processing that relationship requires the kind of sustained analytical thinking that his brain, crayon-impaired, radiation-exposed, damage accumulated over decades cannot reliably perform. The architecture of his own suffering is invisible to him because the contamination that is part of that architecture has made him unable to see it. Burns did not just ruin Mona's life. He engineered Homer's. By driving Mona underground when Homer was 6, Burns ensured Homer would grow up without the emotional foundation that adequate early maternal attachment provides. He produced, through that single act of vindictive persecution, a person who is desperate for approval, terrified of loss, incapable of the kind of self-possession that leads someone to demand decent treatment or to leave a harmful situation. Homer's psychological profile is not simply a character type. It is the predictable adult outcome of childhood emotional deprivation, deliberately imposed by a man who needed a specific kind of worker in his facility and got exactly what he created. The deal between Burns and Grandpa adds a second layer of deliberate architecture. A later season reveals that Grandpa discovered Burns had committed a crime. In exchange for Grandpa's silence, Burns guaranteed Homer permanent employment at the plant regardless of performance. 742 documented errors, and Homer was never permanently terminated, because termination was prohibited by a secret agreement between his father and his mother's persecutor. Homer's job security, the thing he clings to most desperately, the stable point in a life full of instability, is not a function of anything Homer did or is. It is the product of a deal made without his knowledge, in his name, by the two people who most shaped the damage that became his personality. His father traded silence about a crime for his son's guaranteed employment, and neither of them told Homer any of it. 3 generations of the Simpson family, broken by one man's determination not to be inconvenienced. Mona, who saw Burns clearly and paid the full price for seeing him. Abe, who made a deal with the source of the damage and buried the truth of it for decades. Homer, who inherited all the consequences and none of the context, and who has spent his entire adult life working for the man who stole his childhood while never fully understanding that this is what is happening. Mona died in a later episode. The scene has no jokes in it. Homer sits beside her and holds her hand. He watches the mother he barely knew, the mother he spent 27 years believing was dead, the mother who kissed him in his sleep and vanished to protect him from a man he would later make his daily bread from. He watches her leave for the last time. The weight of 27 stolen years sits in the room with them, without any comedic relief at all. The show confirmed the connection in a later season when it is revealed that Burns and Grandpa struck their deal. Burns had committed a crime and Grandpa discovered it. Homer's job guarantee was the price of silence, which means the stable thing in Homer's life, the thing he has organized his entire adult existence around, the employment that gives him the routine and the income, and the identity that substitutes for all the things the radiation took that stability, is also a product of Burns's manipulation. Homer is held in place not just by his limitations but by a deal his father made with his oppressor. The cage was built in 3 separate pieces across 3 separate generations, and it fits Homer perfectly because it was designed with him specifically in mind. Mona fought back. She lost everything. Homer never had the capacity to fight at all, because the conditions for that capacity were removed before he was old enough to understand what was being taken. The show is a comedy. It is genuinely funny across many seasons and many episodes. But underneath the jokes, there is a story about what happens to ordinary people when they live inside a system designed for someone else's benefit. And what happens, the show suggests across decades of careful accumulation, is this. They end up exactly where the system needs them to be. Compliant, grateful, unaware of the architecture of their own constraints, strangling their sons on the couch every evening while the man responsible watches from across town, getting his weekly treatment, glowing faintly, surviving another week on schedule. Number Section 7. The Simpsons predictions: what the show actually got right and why. The predictions phenomenon has kept The Simpsons culturally present in the 2020s in a way its current episode quality alone would not sustain. At any given moment, somewhere on the internet, someone is placing a decades-old clip beside a current headline and asking how they knew. The list is long enough to produce genuine amazement, even approached skeptically. In the year 2000, an episode depicted a future in which Lisa Simpson becomes the first female president of the United States, and her predecessor is identified by name as Donald Trump, 16 years before Trump won the presidency. In 1995, the show depicted a wrist-mounted personal communications device functioning almost exactly like a modern smartwatch. In 1998, Homer encounters a mathematical equation that subsequent analysis by a mathematician suggested appeared to predict the mass of the Higgs boson particle, not confirmed experimentally until 2012. In 1999, Homer proposes a cosmological theory that the universe is shaped like a donut, and years later, analysis of cosmic background radiation produced patterns some cosmologists found consistent with a toroidal universe shape. In a 1993 episode, a flu virus originating from Asia spreads through Springfield, causing panic buying, community disruption, and a frantic search for treatment. The episode aired 27 years before COVID-19. During the fictional Springfield outbreak, The townspeople accidentally release killer bees, and in 2020, Asian giant hornets, dubbed murder hornets by the media, appeared in the United States during the actual pandemic. In 1996, an episode included a joke in which Cypress Hill accidentally books the London Symphony Orchestra for the same venue at the same time. In 2024, Cypress Hill performed with the London Symphony Orchestra at the Royal Albert Hall. 28 years between the joke and the reality, landing close enough to produce the kind of uncanny sensation that makes people forward screenshots to people who have not watched the show in 15 years. In 1998, the show depicted a massive media corporation acquiring a competitor modeled on 20th Century Fox. Disney completed its acquisition of 21st Century Fox in 2019. Al Jean's explanation is direct and unambiguous. If you throw enough darts, you will hit some bullseyes. The show has produced nearly 800 episodes over 36 years, each containing dozens of satirical premises and observations about the direction American culture is moving. When you generate that volume of content over that duration, a portion of it will align with future events through statistical probability alone. Producer Bill Oakley's framing is even more specific. There are very few genuine predictions. Most apparent predictions are coincidence, because the episodes are old enough that history has had time to repeat the patterns they were originally commenting on. The Simpsons writing staff has historically been among the most formally educated in American television. Multiple writers hold degrees from Harvard, Yale, and other research universities. Many have backgrounds in mathematics, physics, computer science, and political economy. These are not people guessing at the future. They are analytically rigorous observers of American culture who spend their professional lives studying patterns, identifying trajectories, and pushing those trajectories forward to their most absurd but internally consistent conclusions. The writers did not predict Trump's presidency. They observed that Trump had been publicly flirting with running for office since the late 1980s and wrote a joke about the logical endpoint of celebrity political culture in America. They did not predict the Disney-Fox merger. They observed that media consolidation was an accelerating structural trend in the entertainment industry and wrote a satirical premise about where that trend was pointing. They did not predict the smartwatch. They observed that personal technology was becoming progressively more miniaturized and wrote a joke about the next step in a progression already clearly underway. The debunking explains most of the predictions. Some of them it cannot fully account for. The Trump prediction specified Trump by name and depicted him descending an escalator in a sequence that visually mirrors his actual 2015 announcement, with more accuracy than broad trend extrapolation can fully explain. The Siegfried and Roy episode depicted a white tiger attacking one of the performers in a way that closely matches the actual 2003 incident in which Roy Horn was critically injured, not in vague terms but in specific visual detail. These are not instances of the show observing a broad trend and projecting it forward. These are instances of specific details aligning with specific future events in ways that produce genuine cognitive dissonance when placed side by side. The more interesting theory is not that the show predicts the future, but that the show shapes it, not through magic or prophecy, through cultural influence. When The Simpsons makes a joke about Trump becoming president, that joke enters the cultural bloodstream. It gets shared and quoted and referenced. It primes the cultural imagination. It makes the premise feel familiar before the reality occurs. When the reality arrives, the response is not shock but recognition. We have seen this before. The Simpsons already showed us this. The show did not predict the event. The show made the event feel like something that was always going to happen. It normalized the premise so thoroughly that when the premise materialized, the audience experienced not surprise but the completion of something that had already been culturally prepared. The show's satire does not forecast the future. It normalizes it. It takes trends in motion and presents them as accomplished facts before they are, and by the time they are accomplished facts, the audience has already been culturally prepared to receive them without the shock that genuine novelty would produce. Springfield is not a mirror of America. America has been staring into the Springfield mirror for so long that it started to look like what it was looking at: the nuclear power plant run by a corrupt billionaire, the incompetent government, the population too distracted and too cognitively managed to notice how badly they are being exploited, the endless cycle of catastrophe and reset, the collective amnesia that lets the same mistakes happen over and over. Springfield is not a prediction of where America was headed. Springfield is a diagnosis of where America already was. The show just wrote it down first. And then there is confirmation bias, which is the piece that makes the phenomenon so persistent. The Simpsons has made thousands of predictions that did not come true. Nobody screenshots those. Nobody builds viral content around the failed predictions. The selection mechanism is entirely one-directional. Hits are remembered and circulated, misses are forgotten immediately. Applied across 788 episodes containing thousands of satirical premises, this selection mechanism produces a highlight reel that looks, presented without context, like extraordinary prophetic accuracy. Even knowing all of that, even with the debunking firmly in place and the mechanism fully understood, the next time a 20-year-old clip lines up with a current headline, there is still a pause. A moment before the rational framework reasserts itself. And that pause is The Simpsons doing what it has always done, making you look at something familiar and feel it differently, just long enough to wonder if you were wrong about what you were looking at. That pause is the real prediction. Not what the show said would happen, but the sensation that something already knew. Section 8. The Principal and the Pauper Springfield's Infrastructure of Denial. Season 9, Episode 2. The Principal and the Pauper. September 28, 1997. The episode the fandom has never forgiven. The episode that, examined carefully, is the most structurally honest thing the show ever produced about what Springfield actually is. The backlash was immediate and sustained. Harry Shearer, who voices both Skinner and Burns, stated his displeasure publicly. Critics argued that the episode destroyed a beloved character by revealing his entire history as fiction. Fans characterized it as the show's betrayal of its own continuity and its audience's investment. It has remained near the bottom of quality rankings for nearly 3 decades. It is cited consistently as the moment the show stopped caring about what it was supposed to be. Here is the premise. Springfield Elementary holds a ceremony honoring Principal Skinner's 20 years of service. A stranger arrives during the event. He introduces himself as Sergeant Seymour Skinner, the real one, a Vietnam War veteran, captured in combat, believed dead, who survived and escaped a prisoner of war camp and has come home to discover that another man has been living his life for 2 decades. The man Springfield has known as Principal Skinner is an imposter. His real name is Armin Tamzarian. Before Vietnam, he was a petty criminal with no particular future and no family who wanted him. Drafted, he served alongside the real Skinner, and when Skinner was captured and presumed dead, Tamzarian traveled to Springfield to inform Skinner's mother Agnes of her son's apparent death. Agnes assumed he was her son. She needed him to be her son. And Tamzarian, who had never been claimed by anyone, who had never had a family or an identity worth inhabiting, went along with it. He became Seymour Skinner. He maintained the fiction for 20 years. He took the man's name, his rank, his life, his mother, his relationships, his history. He lived inside that stolen identity until the real man walked through the door, and the whole architecture of the lie became visible to everyone at once. The town's response is where the episode's actual argument lives. A meeting is held, both men are present. The truth is fully established and universally known. Every person in Springfield has the information. And they do not vote on consequences. They do not vote on how to restore what was taken or how to address 20 years of institutional fraud. They vote on whether to acknowledge the truth at all. Unanimously, they choose to keep the lie. Judge Snyder issues a legal decree identifying the imposter as the real Seymour Skinner. The actual Seymour Skinner, the veteran who survived a prisoner of war camp and returned home to find his life occupied by someone else, is tied to a railroad car and physically removed from Springfield. The judge makes it explicitly illegal to ever reference this truth again under penalty of torture. Let that sit for a moment. A community collectively decided that a comfortable fiction was more valuable than a verified fact, chose that fiction by democratic vote, used the legal system to formalize the choice, and used physical force to remove the person whose continued presence would make the chosen fiction harder to maintain. These are not metaphors. The show depicts them literally and directly. The vote, the decree, the train, the exile. The audience experienced this as creative failure. The episode violated the norm that says character histories, once established, are facts the show is accountable to. The backlash treated it as evidence that the writers had stopped caring about the show's internal coherence. And the audience was not wrong to feel the episode violated certain norms. It did, deliberately, but the violation it was committing was not of the show's relationship to its characters. It was of the show's relationship to its own mechanism. The episode is not breaking the show's continuity. It is showing you how the show's relationship to continuity has always worked. It is showing you the vote, the decree, the physical expulsion of the person who represents the uncomfortable truth. It is showing you, in real time and in detail, the social machinery that produces every other reset in the show's history. Consider what Springfield has experienced across its run. The town has been destroyed and rebuilt, sealed under a government dome, near catastrophically irradiated multiple times. The sun has been literally blocked from the sky. And after every single one of these events, by the following episode, everything is back to normal. Nobody references the previous catastrophe. The slate is wiped. The town continues. The fandom calls this episodic storytelling and accepts it as a format convention of the genre. The Principal and the Pauper is the one episode that shows you this process instead of simply producing it. Every other reset happens off-screen, between episodes, without the audience being shown how the return to baseline occurs. This episode puts the camera directly on the mechanism. It shows a town voting explicitly to maintain a lie rather than live with an uncomfortable truth. It shows the legal apparatus used to enforce the chosen fiction. It shows the physical removal of the person who insists on reality. It does the thing every other episode does. It resets Springfield to its preferred version of itself, but this time it does it in front of you instead of between episodes. The audience found it disturbing not because it was worse than the other resets, but because it was identical to them while being visible. The other resets feel like comfortable narrative convention because they happen out of sight. This one felt like a moral failure because it happened in the room. The only difference between them is transparency. Springfield does not forget catastrophes because its residents are stupid. Springfield forgets because the alternative to forgetting is a confrontation with what the forgetting is protecting. If the town remembered the dome, it would have to confront the contamination. If it confronted the contamination, it would have to challenge the plant. Challenging the plant means challenging Burns. Challenging Burns threatens the economic infrastructure the entire community depends on for its existence. The forgetting is not a symptom of stupidity. It is a survival mechanism employed by a community that has correctly identified that the alternative to amnesia is economic collapse. The real Seymour Skinner was Springfield's canary in the coal mine. He arrived with proof that the official story was false. A living, breathing veteran who could produce evidence that the man teaching Springfield's children was not who he had claimed to be for 2 decades. And Springfield's response was immediate, democratic, and legally formalized. Exile the proof and make it a crime to speak of it. That is not a comedy beat. That is the show telling you, as plainly as it is capable of saying anything, how Springfield processes inconvenient reality. It does not process it, it removes it. And it makes the removal official. And it makes speaking of the removal illegal. This is not a cartoon town making a cartoon decision. This is a very specific and very coherent description of how communities actually manage uncomfortable truths through collective agreement, through institutional enforcement, through the social punishment of anyone who insists on saying what everyone has agreed not to say. The real Seymour Skinner is still out there somewhere on his train, expelled from his own life, the last honest man in a town that passed a law against honesty. And in his absence, Armin Tamzarian teaches their children and calls Agnes mother, and the town calls him Skinner. And the legal decree ensures that the word for his situation, imposter, fraud, thief of an identity, is not permitted to be spoken. Springfield functions. The school runs. The community continues. And the truth that would crack the foundation of it is on a train headed away from town, unable to return, prohibited from being named. That is Springfield. That is how it has always worked. The Principal and the Pauper is the one episode that did not have the decency to let the mechanism operate off-screen. Number. Section 9. Ned Flanders and the darkness behind the kindness. On the surface, Ned Flanders has everything. Kind, generous, devoutly faithful, physically healthy, financially stable, a present and caring father, a patient neighbor, by almost every measurable metric a better person than Homer Simpson in every dimension that could be assessed. The show's most prominent success story. The man doing it right, living next door to the man doing everything wrong, as a daily demonstration that a different way of being is available to anyone who chooses it. The show punishes him for it, Systematically, specifically, relentlessly, without apparent intention of stopping. Maud Flanders was killed at a Springfield Speedway event. A t-shirt cannon misfired because Homer was dodging the t-shirts being launched into the crowd, and the t-shirts Homer avoided struck Maud instead and knocked her from the bleachers. Homer's reflexive self-protection, his failure to consider what his evasion would do to the person sitting directly behind him, is the proximate cause of Maud Flanders' death. Homer's selfishness killed Ned's wife, and Ned forgave him, not because Homer earned it, not because Homer made genuine amends or demonstrated that he understood what had happened, because Ned forgives, he absorbs. He responds with grace to things that most people would respond to with rage. This appears saintly. When you know what the hurricane episode reveals, it appears as something considerably more complicated and considerably sadder. A hurricane hits Springfield. Every neighboring house sustains minor damage. Ned's house is completely destroyed. The community rallies. Homer organizes the reconstruction. The house is built. Ned arrives. He opens the front door. The house collapses immediately because Homer built it with his characteristic combination of enthusiasm and total incompetence. And Ned, looking at the collapsed pile that represents everything the community that killed his wife can offer him in restitution, breaks. He breaks methodically and quietly, working through everything he has been holding in silence, every indignity, every loss, every moment where the world gave him pain and his conditioning gave him patience. He did not choose and would not have chosen, if choosing had ever been available to him. He tells the town what he actually thinks about them. He is specific. He is honest. He says things he has been holding inside for decades, and then he is institutionalized. Because expressing genuine feeling is, in Springfield's social framework, a crisis requiring medical management. In the facility, the backstory emerges. Ned was violent as a child, feral and aggressive and uncontrollable. His parents, beatniks, opposed to discipline on ideological grounds, took him to a psychiatrist who spent years conditioning the aggression out of him through intensive behavioral modification. The treatment produced the Ned Flanders that Springfield knows. Gentle, patient, generous, forgiving, incapable of sustained anger regardless of the provocation. But the treatment also produced the gap between who Ned is and who Ned was conditioned to be. His patience is not organic. His forgiveness is not grace. They are programmed outputs of a system installed in him before he was old enough to consent to the installation. He was not taught to be kind. He was conditioned to be incapable of the alternative. Everything about Ned reads differently once you know this. His patience with Homer is the trained response of a man whose brain was rewired to suppress anger regardless of what triggers it. His faith is a framework he constructed to explain why he keeps absorbing unrequited harm, because without the framework, the accumulation of loss and unfairness becomes incomprehensible. His forgiveness of Homer after Maud's death is not evidence of extraordinary character. It is the output of a conditioning system designed to prevent the rage underneath from reaching the surface under any circumstances whatsoever. God speaks to Homer. This is canonical, established across multiple episodes. Homer has direct face-to-face conversations with a divine figure. The man who sleeps in his pew, who treats religious practice as an inconvenience, who gives almost no indication that faith is a functioning part of his daily life, this man has divine access, direct, personal, conversational, and Ned Flanders, who has organized the entirety of his existence around his relationship to God, who has made faith the central organizing principle of every professional and personal choice he has ever made, has received in 36 years not a single direct response. God talks to Homer. God is silent with Ned. The show knows what it is saying here. It is saying that virtue is not rewarded in Springfield, that goodness does not function as protection, that the system, whether you understand it as the radiation, or Burns's empire, or the structural decay of the American middle class, or simply the particular cruelty of a universe that distributes its conversations with the divine based on no discernible moral principle, operates on compliance and on the distribution of power rather than on moral merit. Ned is the most compliant person in Springfield. He was made compliant before he was old enough to choose otherwise. And his reward for a lifetime of genuine effort toward genuine goodness is a dead wife, a collapsed house, a neighbor who has cost him more than he will ever fully count, and a God who directs his conversation toward the person least concerned with deserving it. Homer does everything wrong. The system forgives him. Ned does everything right. The system punishes him. They live next door to each other. They have lived next door to each other for 36 years. The gap between them has not closed and will not close. The system is not designed to close it. It is designed to keep Homer at the plant and Ned at the fence and Burns at the top and everyone exactly where they are forever, in a loop that does not break and does not reward rightness, and does not answer the question of why kindness and outcome are so completely disconnected in a town that calls itself ordinary. Ned Flanders is the saddest character on this show, not Homer, who is too cognitively impaired to fully comprehend his own suffering, not Lisa, who is young enough to still believe things might improve if she keeps pushing, not Burns, who is too powerful to ever face the consequences of what he has done, and therefore too powerful to feel the weight of it. Ned, the man who does everything right and gets nothing in return. The man who was programmed to absorb rather than resist, and who has spent his entire adult life absorbing everything Springfield can produce, in total and perfectly maintained silence, because the programming does not permit anything else. He will be next door next week. He will smile over the fence. He will forgive whatever comes next. And God will keep talking to Homer. Number Section 10. Where is Springfield? The Geography of Denial. Springfield is the most famous fictional town in American history. More people can identify its defining features and its major characters than can name the capitals of most American states. It has a nuclear power plant, a tire fire that has been burning for decades without explanation or intervention, a gorge people regularly fall into, a harbor of unclear nautical purpose, a monorail whose acquisition remains a case study in civic credulity, an elementary school, a prison, 2 hospitals, a bar, and a quickie mart functioning simultaneously as convenience store, cultural anchor, and de facto community center. It also has mountains, and an ocean, and desert, and farmland, and forests, and weather ranging from severe winter storms to tropical heat waves, sometimes within the same fictional year. It borders Ohio in some episodes, Nevada in others, Maine in others, Kentucky in others. These are not adjacent states. Springfield has been placed on the coast and in the heartland and near the Canadian border and within reach of Mexico. It is simultaneously all of these things, or definitively none of them, depending on the episode and sometimes depending on the scene. The show has been deliberately contradicting itself about Springfield's location for its entire run. Every episode that produces a clue suggesting a specific location is eventually contradicted by another episode placing Springfield somewhere geographically incompatible. Lisa's phone area code has been a Missouri prefix. The state abbreviation on screen has been NT, which is not a designation belonging to any real American state. When Homer once called the state capital, the operator mentioned a state beginning with a vowel, eliminating part of the alphabet while leaving dozens of possibilities viable. The show gives you information appearing to narrow things down, and then provides contradicting information that reopens everything it seemed to close. It is not forgetfulness, it is policy. Matt Groening acknowledged in 2012 that he named the town after Springfield, Oregon, the nearest substantial town to where he grew up in Portland. He also noted he chose Springfield because it is one of the most common city names in America, present in nearly every state, which means the name itself resists geographic anchoring. The name is everywhere. You cannot locate something named after everywhere. For a brief period following the interview, the mystery appeared resolved. And then the show continued producing episodes placing Springfield in geographic contexts inconsistent with Oregon, as if the creator's public statement had not been made. The writers did not treat Groening's confession as settling anything. The mystery was deliberately reopened. The creative team had decided long ago that Springfield's geographic ambiguity was more useful than a fixed location, and they chose to preserve that ambiguity even after the creator himself attempted to resolve it. The surface explanation is widely understood and has been confirmed by the show's creators. Springfield is designed to be every American town, the universal American community assembled from recognizable elements of every region. The industrial decay of the Rust Belt, the suburban sprawl of the Sun Belt, the small-town insularity of New England, the cultural flatness of the Midwest, the natural grandeur of the Mountain West, the coastal ambience of both coasts simultaneously. Whatever kind of American community you grew up in or near, Springfield contains something that registers as familiar. A town with a fixed location would feel specific to that location. A town with no location belongs to everyone who is watching. Under the theories, the geographic unfixity takes on additional dimensions. If the radiation theory is correct, there is no obvious reason why physical geography should be exempt from the contamination's effects. If radiation can produce deviations from biological norms as dramatic as those visible in Springfield's residents, 4 fingers, yellow skin, IQs ranging from clinical disability to unmeasurable genius, healing rates that should not exist, then perhaps it has affected the physical landscape too. Perhaps Springfield has coastline and mountains and desert in implausible proximity, not because the show cannot maintain consistency, but because the contamination has warped the space around the town the way it has warped the bodies of the dead people inside it. A radiation field powerful enough to produce Blinky the three-eyed fish, and Homer's nearly infinite resilience, is powerful enough to produce geographic anomalies. The land around the plant is as mutated as the people living on it. Blinky was just the only mutation the show thought to name. If the coma theory is correct, Springfield's geographic impossibility is the most natural thing in the world. Homer's unconscious mind does not contain a precise geographic map. It contains impressions, emotional fragments of places visited, half-remembered images from television, sensory memories from before the coma that are not organized by geographic logic because the unconscious mind does not organize space by geography. It organizes by feeling, by what belongs together in the dream's emotional terms. Mountains feel like security, ocean feels like escape, desert feels like loneliness. Farmland feels like the American heartland Homer would have absorbed from television and road trips and the ambient cultural imagery of growing up in the late 20th century. Homer assembled Springfield from every American landscape he ever encountered or imagined, layering them without regard for their actual physical relationships, because the dream does not need geographic accuracy. It needs to feel like home. If the collective denial framework applies, Springfield's resistance to geographic location is its most powerful act of institutional self-protection. You cannot investigate a nuclear facility if you cannot establish which state's regulatory framework applies to it. You cannot file charges against a power plant whose jurisdiction is perpetually undefined. You cannot establish consistent oversight of a facility whose state of residence changes between episodes. Springfield floats between states because a town with a fixed location is a town that can be regulated. A town with no location has no fixed regulatory authority, no permanent state attorney general whose jurisdiction covers it, no stable relationship with any environmental agency that might eventually decide to investigate what is being discharged into the local watershed and what it is doing to the people drinking from it. The geographic ambiguity is not a comedy device. It is, within the logic of the theories, the most effective legal shield in Springfield's long history of avoiding accountability. The plant has 342 violations. The water has three-eyed fish. The residents are yellow and four-fingered and neurologically compromised. And the agency responsible for addressing these facts cannot establish which state to file the paperwork with. So the paperwork sits in a queue somewhere between Ohio and Nevada, and the violations continue and the fish keep growing extra eyes. And Springfield floats, placeless and unaccountable, in the geographic imagination of a country that somehow contains it without being able to locate it. Springfield will not be located, not because the show cannot decide, but because the show decided long ago that the mystery serves the show better than any answer. A town that could be anywhere belongs to everyone. A town that belongs to everyone cannot be shut down. Number Section 11. The floating timeline, and why nobody ages. Bart Simpson was 10 years old in December of 1989 when the show debuted. He is 10 years old right now. Lisa was 8 then and is 8 now. Maggie was 1 then and is 1 now. Homer and Marge were in their mid-30s and remain there. 36 years have elapsed in the real world. 0 years have elapsed in Springfield. The characters are locked at the ages they held at the beginning, living through decades of changing technology and shifting culture without accumulating a single year. The floating timeline is the industry term for this arrangement. The show's present is always the viewer's present. In a 2025 episode, the characters live in 2025. In a 1995 episode, they lived in 1995. The calendar moves, the cultural references update. The technology the characters use reflects the era in which each episode was produced. The characters do not age. They exist in temporal suspension while everything around them proceeds at normal speed. Most animated shows use some version of this arrangement. Most of them do not run long enough for it to produce contradictions as massive as The Simpsons has accumulated. Most of them do not run long enough for the floating timeline to become a philosophical statement rather than simply a production convention. The most visible problem is Homer and Marge's backstory. When the show began, their shared history was rooted in the late 1970s and early 1980s, specific in its era, detailed in its period texture, appropriate for parents in their mid-30s during the late 1980s. The arithmetic held. Homer meeting Marge in the 70s, having Bart and then Lisa and then Maggie, arriving at the show's present moment as parents in their mid-30s. It made sense, but as the floating present moved forward decade by decade, the arithmetic broke. If Homer and Marge are still in their mid-30s in 2025, they did not meet in 1978. They met in approximately 2007. Their formative years were not defined by Watergate and disco. They were defined by MySpace and early YouTube. The era-specific texture that grounded the original backstory becomes impossible to maintain when the present keeps moving forward while the characters stay still. The show has adapted by rewriting their origin story multiple times. Homer and Marge have been hippies and grunge fans and hipsters and millennials, depending on which decade the floating present requires their youth to have occurred in. Their love story is retold with different era-specific wrapping around the same emotional core. They do not have a fixed past. They have a series of approximations, whatever backstory the current episode's relationship to time demands, discarded when the next revision is required. Their memories are not stable. Their origin story is a document that keeps being revised. And the show treats this as normal because within the logic of a floating timeline, it is normal. Characters do not have histories. They have approximations of histories that adjust themselves to fit whatever the present requires. Now, apply the theories simultaneously, because this is where they converge. The coma theory. Nobody ages because Homer's coma brain cannot age them. His memory of his family is fixed at the moment of last conscious contact. The floating timeline is not a production convention. It is the structure of unconsciousness. A mind that has lost contact with the passage of time produces exactly this: a permanent present, constructed from the last clear experience, unable to update because updating requires information the coma did not provide. The backstory rewrites themselves not because the writers are careless, but because the dream brain keeps revising its historical reconstruction as new ambient material enters the hospital room and gets incorporated into the simulation. Each flashback that revises Homer and Marge's origin story is the dream recalibrating its past using whatever cultural input it has most recently absorbed. The radiation theory. Nobody ages because the cellular biology of Springfield's residents has been so fundamentally disrupted by chronic radioactive exposure that the normal processes through which cells age and tissue deteriorates cannot proceed. The same contamination that gives Homer his extraordinary physical resilience has intervened in the aging process at the cellular level, preventing the accumulation of biological time that produces visible aging in uncontaminated populations. The collective denial framework. Nobody ages because Springfield has voted, implicitly and repeatedly, not to acknowledge the passage of time in ways that would force confrontation with how much has changed. The amnesia that erases catastrophic events between episodes is the same mechanism preventing aging between seasons. The town collectively maintains a specific version of reality, including everyone's age against the encroachment of time that keeps trying to revise it. The show has imagined its characters aging with genuine craft and emotional investment. The season 6 episode Lisa's Wedding flashes forward to show Lisa at 23 engaged, living in a city far from Springfield, navigating the specific tension between who she has become and the family she came from. The future depicted is rich and specific. Lisa is the person the show's early seasons suggested she would become. Intelligent, principled, lonely in the particular way that very smart people in ordinary circumstances tend to be lonely, still looking for a kind of connection the world around her does not quite know how to offer. The episode proves that the show has the imagination and the craft to tell aging stories about these characters. And then Lisa returns to being 8, Bart returns to being 10. The flash forward is sealed shut. The permanent present resumes. The show can imagine growth. It refuses to allow it. The floating timeline is the show's thesis statement, not a format convention, not a creative compromise, a thesis about what this show is and what it is for. The Simpsons are frozen because we need them to be frozen. Because they represent something the messy, dysfunctional, loving, resilient, eternally recurring version of the middle-class American family that we have decided we are not ready to let conclude. Homer must always be figuring things out. Marge must always be holding the structure together. Bart must always be the energy the household cannot quite contain. Lisa must always be asking whether things could be better. Maggie must always be watching. The moment the Simpson family ages in earnest, the show becomes an elegy. A story about a family that ran out of time. About children who grew up and moved away and became people their parents do not entirely recognize. About parents who are older now than they were, who are closer to the end than to the beginning, who look back at the years that passed and wonder what they were doing while those years were happening. America has not been watching for that story. America has been watching for the one where the kids are always young, and the house is always full, and the Sunday at 8 always arrives with the familiar opening notes and the couch gag and the family settling in together. For the story that does not end, for the loop that does not break. The loop is not their prison, it is ours. We built it, we maintain it. We pressed pause in December of 1989, and we never pressed play. And 36 years later, we are still watching the same family, in the same house, in the same impossible town, waiting for something to change, knowing it will not, having decided collectively, repeatedly, without explicit vote but with absolute consistency, that we prefer the loop to whatever follows it. We prefer the heaven of the unchanging to the grief of the aging. We prefer Bart at 10 to the question of who Bart would be at 46. We prefer Maggie watching to the possibility that Maggie might finally speak and that what she says might be something we are not prepared to hear. The Simpsons are trapped in time because we trapped them there. And every time we watch, we confirm the arrangement. Number Section 12. Hans Moleman, Sideshow Bob, and the final mystery. Hans Moleman has died more times than any other character in the history of American animation. By any reasonable count across canonical episodes, not Treehouse of Horror installments, not dream sequences, not what-if scenarios, but regular episodes in the main continuity of the show, Moleman has died and returned more times than any comparable character in any animated series that has ever been produced. He is crushed by falling objects, struck by vehicles, incinerated in various configurations. He drowns. He is buried alive. He is consumed by animals. He walks into traffic. He experiences medical emergencies depicted without ambiguity as fatal. And then he appears in the next episode, in his usual background position in various Springfield scenes, ready for whatever comes next without explanation, without reference, without anyone in the show noticing that the man who died 3 episodes ago is standing in the background of the DMV. Nobody explains this. The show never references it. It is treated as background noise, a recurring gag requiring no justification and deserving no further examination. But the theories do not let you simply leave it there. Under the radiation framework, Moleman represents something extraordinary. He is not surviving his deaths the way Homer survives his injuries. Homer endures damage and heals through biological adaptation. His body is resilient in ways consistent with a biological system that has adapted to low-level chronic radioactive exposure over decades. Moleman actually dies. His body ceases to function. And then he reconstitutes. If the radiation leaking from Burns's plant can do this to a person, if it can make cellular death itself reversible, if it can enable biological reconstitution after fatal physical trauma, then Moleman is not just a comedy character. He is the most biologically significant individual in Springfield. His cellular structure has been so thoroughly altered by radioactive exposure that mortality itself has become negotiable for him. Death is not the terminus it is for everyone else. It is a temporary state followed by a kind of reconstruction that the show depicts but never names. Consider his stated age. In one episode, Moleman mentions in passing that he is 31 years old. He appears to be somewhere between 80 and 100. He has the posture, the skin, the movement patterns, and the general presentation of a man in extreme old age. If he is telling the truth and there is no in-universe mechanism by which his casual self-report is more likely to be a lie than a statement of fact, then something aged him catastrophically and did so in a very short time relative to normal human aging. The radiation that may have made him unkillable also appears to have dramatically accelerated his apparent aging. He is simultaneously the most deteriorated and the most biologically resilient person in Springfield. The contamination that destroyed his appearance also apparently neutralized his capacity to die from the consequences of that destruction. He looks like he should have died decades ago and cannot die at all. Springfield's most extreme mutation and its most frequent death, occurring in the same small, soft-spoken man who mostly just wants to show his movie about a man who cannot find love. Under the coma theory, Molman is a background process in Homer's dream, a minor character whose function is to give the dreamscape the texture of a populated town. Homer's unconscious mind does not invest in Molman the cognitive resources it invests in the primary characters. The primary characters are maintained with continuity because they are the people the dream is for. They are the purpose of the simulation. Molman exists the way furniture exists in a room. He is there when the dream needs him to be there. When the dream stops needing him, he disappears. When it needs him again, it reconstitutes him, because the dream requires a certain number of bodies to make Springfield feel like a real and populated place, rather than a small set of primary characters floating in an empty cartoon space. His deaths are lapses in background maintenance. His returns are the dream reassembling set dressing it had allowed to lapse between episodes. Under the collective denial framework, Molman's deaths are simply another entry on Springfield's long list of things the community has agreed not to notice. A man dies in public, visibly, with witnesses present, repeatedly, across multiple decades, and nobody investigates. Nobody calls for an ambulance with any consistent urgency. Nobody asks how he keeps coming back. The town has normalized Molman's death cycle the way it has normalized the three-eyed fish, and the glowing billionaire, and the baby who possibly shot someone, and the principal who spent 20 years as someone else. Entirely. It is simply a thing that happens in Springfield. It happens. You see it. You move on. The community has a social contract that says certain things are not followed up on, and Molman's repeated deaths fall within the scope of that contract comfortably. Molman once stated his age as 31. He appears to be in extreme old age. If the radiation is doing this to him, if it can take a man of 31 and make him look 90, while simultaneously making him incapable of permanent death, then Springfield is producing biological effects far stranger than the ones the show usually foregrounds. Blinky the fish got the headline. Molman is the footnote that nobody has examined closely enough. He is the show's most extreme example of what the contamination can do to a human body when the variables align in a particular direction. He is what happens when the radiation amplifies the wrong systems and suppresses the right ones. He is Springfield's most complete experiment. And nobody asks. Now, Sideshow Bob, because the character of Robert Underdunk Terwilliger Jr. is one of the show's most deliberately constructed long arcs, and it contains a psychological argument the show has been making slowly across decades without ever quite stating it directly in the clean, conclusive form the argument deserves. Bob is, within the show's internal logic, one of the most intelligent people in Springfield. He attended Yale. He demonstrates sophisticated literary knowledge and broad cultural education across multiple episodes, quoting opera and classical literature and referencing the kinds of humanistic traditions that most Springfield residents do not acknowledge exist. He is capable of complex long-range planning and real-time strategic adaptation. He is, by any standard that the show applies to measuring intelligence, a genius operating in a town of people who are, through no fault of their own, significantly impaired. He is also a person who has dedicated an enormous and largely wasted proportion of his adult life to the attempted murder of a 10-year-old boy. He has tried to kill Bart in elaborate, carefully prepared ways across many episodes spanning many seasons. He has been imprisoned, released, and immediately resumed his fixation with a consistency that suggests the fixation is not a plan he is executing, but a structure he is living inside. Not something he chose to pursue, but something that has become the organizing principle of his existence. The mystery is not why Bob keeps failing. He keeps failing because the show cannot let him succeed. That is the structural reality of his situation. The mystery is why Bob keeps trying, given that he is smart enough to understand exactly why he keeps failing. A person of Bob's intelligence should be able to adapt strategy, to learn from the pattern of failures in ways that address what keeps going wrong. He cannot do this in any sustained or productive way. Not because he is incapable of learning, his intelligence is clearly sufficient for learning of any kind, but because learning would require changing the nature of the project. And the project is not, at its deepest level, about killing Bart at all. The project is about having a project, about having something that demands the full deployment of Bob's considerable intelligence, about being the kind of person whose capabilities have a specific, demanding application in a world that has given him, outside of this one compulsion, very little to be genuinely engaged by. Springfield is not a community of intellectual peers for Sideshow Bob. Most of its residents are cognitively impaired by radiation exposure. The few who might have been his equals, Lisa, perhaps, at some future age, are either too young to engage him seriously or too occupied with their own battles to bother. Bob is the most intelligent person in a town that was designed by its history to produce people who are not. His intelligence has nowhere to go, except toward Bart. The episode in which Bob finally, in a comedic flash-forward sequence, actually succeeds, actually kills Bart, is the most honest thing the show has done with the character. Not because of the success, but because of what happens after it. Bob wins. He achieves the goal around which he has organized the past decade or more of his existence, and winning feels like nothing. The absence of the pursuit is more devastating than the pursuit itself ever was. He has oriented his entire existence around this goal, and achieving it leaves him without a structure for continued existence. The obsession was the purpose. With the purpose completed, there is no purpose. There is only a man of enormous intelligence with nothing left to apply it to, standing in a Springfield that does not need him, in a body that will not die, in a loop that has just run out of its organizing premise. Bob has to be talked out of his own victory by Bart, who points out that Bob has always needed a worthy adversary, and that Bart's death removes the adversary. Bob unchooses his victory. He allows Bart to live because the alternative, actually succeeding, is more frightening than continuing to fail. Success means the end of the only organizing principle he has. The chase is the heaven. The capture would be the end of it. And in Springfield, with its floating timeline and its permanent present, and its guarantee that Bart will always be 10, and Bob will always be plotting, and the loop will always continue, the chase can go on indefinitely, which is, in some sense, exactly what Bob requires. He does not want Bart dead. He wants the pursuit. He wants to be the kind of person who is pursuing something worthy of his capabilities. And Bart is the only thing in Springfield that has ever been worth pursuing. Which means Bart, in his own strange way, is the most important person in Bob's life, the adversary who gives the genius a reason to deploy his genius. The 10-year-old boy who, by continuing to survive, allows a man of enormous and unused intelligence to continue having a purpose. They are locked together in a relationship neither of them chose, and neither of them can fully leave, because leaving it would mean Bob has nothing left, and Bart loses the most complicated relationship he has ever had with anyone who takes him entirely seriously. That is Springfield's final mystery, expressed in two characters facing each other across the eternal recurrence of their shared loop. The most intelligent person in town, locked in permanent pursuit of a 10-year-old, because that is the only thing the town has offered him that uses what he is. And the 10-year-old, perpetually surviving, growing no older, locked in permanent flight, because growing up would mean the loop ends, and the loop ending means the dream stops, and the dream stopping means whatever is on the other side of it. And so we arrive at the end. The question all the theories produce together when you set aside their specific mechanisms and look at what they agree on. Something is wrong in Springfield. Something that goes deeper than animation style or narrative convention or the accumulated creative decisions of a very long-running television production. Whether you understand that something as radiation or unconsciousness or social denial or institutional corruption or the sheer weight of 36 years without being allowed to change the conclusion every theory reaches is the same. The people are trapped. The loop is running. Time does not progress as it should. Consequences do not accumulate as they should. The town resets. The characters remain. The show continues. The theories exist because some people looked at Springfield and refused to accept the surface. They looked at the yellow faces and the four fingers and the forgotten disasters and the Basual reset and the ancient billionaire and the baby who may or may not have shot him and the principal who was someone else the whole time, and they decided the show was doing something more coherent than a 36-year accumulation of individual creative decisions. They decided there was a story underneath the stories, and they went looking. What they found, what we have been tracing through tonight, is a version of Springfield stranger and sadder, and in some ways more beautiful than the one the show presents at face value. A version where Homer's stupidity is a scar left by a system that broke his family before he was old enough to defend himself. where Maggie's silence is the most strategically sophisticated thing anyone in the household has ever done, where Burns's immortality is the logical conclusion of a century of unchecked wealth applied to the single problem of personal survival, where Marge's patience is the structural element that keeps the whole thing from collapsing into something unlivable, where Bart's rebellion is the only sane response available to someone growing up inside a loop he can feel but cannot name, where Lisa, 8 years old and brilliant and deeply alone, keeps asking the questions that nobody around her wants answered, because she is the only person in Springfield who has not stopped looking. That is the show. 36 seasons, 788 episodes, the most analyzed, most theorized, most dissected fictional world in the history of television. And after all the theories and all the evidence and all the hours of careful looking, the biggest mystery is still the simplest one. Why can we not let them go? Maybe because they are us. Homer is our father, and Marge is our mother, and Bart is who we wanted to be when we were young enough to want things that recklessly. Maybe Lisa is who we should have become, and Maggie is who we keep hidden, the capable, strategic, watching part of ourselves that we maintain behind whatever our equivalent of the pacifier happens to be. Or maybe it is simpler than that. Maybe we cannot let them go, because letting them go means admitting that 36 years have passed, that we are older now than we were when we started watching, that the couch we sat on as children during the opening credits is in a different house now, or someone else's house, or gone entirely. That the version of the world in which The Simpsons first appeared and felt new is a version of the world we cannot get back to. And as long as the show continues, as long as the loop keeps floating, as long as Bart is 10 and Lisa is 8, and Maggie is watching everything from wherever she sits with those enormous, knowing eyes, we do not have to admit any of that. We can press play. The opening notes will come, the couch gag will run, the yellow family will settle in together, and for however long the episode lasts, we can go home. They are trapped in Springfield, but we are the ones who trapped them. We pressed pause in December of 1989, and we never pressed play. And here we are, 36 years later, still watching, still choosing the loop, still deciding, every time we put on an episode, that this version of something permanent, yellow and imperfect and familiar and never-ending is worth keeping still. The dream is not over. It may never be over. And some nights, when the world is loud and the hour is late and you just need somewhere soft to land, that is exactly enough. Thank you for spending this time in Springfield. If you are watching this late and winding down, leave a comment with where you are and what time it is there. It is always good to know who is out there. Subscribe if you want more nights like this one. And whenever you need to come back, Springfield will be here. It always is. The Burns immortality in full, a century of engineered survival. The question of how Burns has stayed alive long enough to remember the Spanish-American War is not, within the show's logic, a philosophical abstraction. It is an engineering problem, and the show, across decades of accumulated detail, provides enough pieces to reconstruct the solution even though it never states it directly. Start with what we know about Burns's body in its current state. He has every disease simultaneously. His immune system is not functioning in any conventional sense. It is instead locked in a three-way stalemate between competing illnesses, each preventing the others from progressing to the lethal stage. His physical strength is effectively zero. He has, on multiple occasions, been immobilized by objects that would be trivially manageable for any healthy adult. A moth lands on him and he struggles to support its weight. A single sheet of paper presents genuine challenge. His body has deteriorated to a point that would be terminal for any ordinary human being in any ordinary medical situation. And yet he functions. He runs a corporation. He schemes with patience and complexity across multi-episode arcs that require him to hold contradictory information in mind, to track the movements of multiple parties, to adapt strategy when circumstances change. His mind is not deteriorating at anything like the rate his body is. Whatever is happening to Burns at the biological level is doing it selectively destroying the physical infrastructure while leaving the cognitive architecture largely intact. This selectivity is itself a clue. The weekly radiation treatments are the mechanism. But the question is, what mechanism within the radiation treatments produces this specific selective effect? Why does the radiation preserve cognitive function while allowing physical deterioration to continue? Why does it maintain the disease equilibrium rather than curing the diseases? Why does it work on a precisely weekly schedule rather than a monthly or quarterly one? The answer that the radiation theory suggests is that Burns's body has adapted to radiation in the way that organisms adapt to environmental pressures over long periods of exposure. Not through evolution in the biological sense, the timescale is too short and the effect is too individual, but through something analogous to metabolic adaptation. His cells have reorganized over decades of exposure to require radiation input as part of their basic operating parameters. His body does not simply tolerate radiation, it has incorporated it. The radiation is not treating an illness. It is providing a substrate that his altered cellular processes cannot function without. This makes the treatment dependency make more sense than it initially appears. It is not that Burns takes a pill to stay alive, the way a diabetic takes insulin. The relationship is more fundamental than that. His cells have been reshaped over many decades of constant radiation exposure to require radiation the way normal cells require glucose. Remove the glucose from a normal human and they die. Remove the radiation from Burns and the metabolic infrastructure of his cells, which has been restructured around radiation input over a century of adaptation, fails. The diseases surge because the only thing keeping them balanced was the radiation. The only thing keeping the radiation supplied was the weekly treatment. Miss the treatment, and the whole architecture fails simultaneously. Smithers knows this, not necessarily in clinical detail, but functionally. He knows what the treatment schedule is. He knows what missing it means. He has watched Burns come close to missing treatments and observed the consequences. He has built his entire professional life around ensuring the treatment happens, because somewhere in the background of their relationship is his understanding that the alternative to his vigilance is Burns's death. Smithers's devotion is real. His feelings for Burns, whatever their precise nature, are also real. But the intensity of his devotion, the way it makes leaving impossible regardless of how Burns treats him, is grounded partly in his knowledge of what leaving means. He is not just loyal. He is the only person standing between Burns and the collapse of a century of engineered survival. The emotional dependency and the practical necessity have wound themselves together into something that cannot easily be separated. Burns's relationship to death has also been shaped by this situation in ways the show gestures toward without fully exploring. He has been shot. He has been hospitalized dozens of times. He has been attacked, abandoned, poisoned, and subjected to environmental conditions that should be fatal for someone of his physical condition. Every time, he comes back. Not through the cartoon resilience Homer displays, where the body simply repairs itself faster than physics should allow. Burns comes back through resources, through money and access and the infrastructure of survival that he has spent a century building around himself. A private medical team is always nearby. The treatment infrastructure is always maintained. The wealth that funds all of it is always available. Burns has not survived because he is lucky or because he is physically resilient. He has survived because he built a system designed to keep him alive regardless of what happens to his body, and that system has never failed him completely. The tragedy is what the system cost. Burns has spent a century maintaining his survival, and the resources required to do so, the money, the infrastructure, the political influence, the medical team, the plant, the contamination, the impaired population too damaged to challenge him, have been funded by Springfield. The town that is dying by degrees from the plant's contamination is also the town that funds the treatments keeping Burns alive. Springfield is, in the most literal sense, paying for Burns's immortality. Every dollar of profit the plant generates above its operating costs goes, in some portion, toward the system that keeps Burns going another week. The contamination that kills his employees by inches is what funds the protocol that saves him from dying by the same process. He knows this. And he keeps going, because the alternative is to stop, and stopping is the one thing Burns's entire system was built to prevent. Mona Simpson, the thread that connects everything. The Mona Simpson story is the show's most under-examined piece of structural argument. It is usually read as a touching episode about Homer's missing mother, one of the show's genuine emotional peaks, and then filed under great standalone episodes that do not necessarily connect to the larger picture. But the Mona story is not standalone. It is the keystone. It is the piece of the Burns narrative that reveals the personal dimension of the contamination conspiracy. It is the moment the show shows you that what Burns did to Springfield, he also did to the Simpson family specifically, deliberately, and with a specificity that extends across 3 generations. Burns owned a biological weapons facility in Springfield, Let that land for a moment, because the show presents it as a fairly casual backstory element and then moves past it. Burns was not merely a negligent industrialist whose power plant leaked radiation into the community. He was actively, deliberately manufacturing weaponized biological pathogens inside the town. He was cooking diseases for military application in a laboratory located in the same community where he operated a nuclear power plant with 342 violations. The contamination of Springfield was not limited to radiation. It included, for at least some period of time, active germ warfare research. The town was being used as a location for two simultaneous programs of industrial contamination, one nuclear, one biological, both operated by the same man, both funded by the same wealth, both occurring in the same community whose residents were not informed and whose ability to object was compromised by their economic dependence on the same man running both operations. Mona saw this clearly enough to act against it. She understood what the laboratory was producing, and she understood what it meant for the people living near it. And she chose to do something about it, even though doing something about it carried enormous personal risk. The raid succeeded. The biological agents were destroyed. And Burns, in his response, did not simply report Mona to the authorities and let the legal process handle it. He pursued her. Personally. Actively. Across decades. He maintained sufficient awareness of her fugitive existence that when she appeared on a Springfield street 27 years later, he recognized her through a cab window and called the FBI immediately. That is not the behavior of someone who reported a crime and moved on. That is the behavior of someone who has maintained a personal grudge across more than a quarter century and has the resources to act on it indefinitely. The pursuit of Mona is Burns's most personal use of his power. The plant is business. The political corruption is operational. The contamination is a byproduct of profit maximization. But hunting a woman who destroyed his weapons lab for 27 years, that is something else. That is what Burns looks like when he takes something personally. And Mona took something from him that money could not fully replace. She destroyed research that represented time and investment and a specific strategic vision for what his power could become. She also humiliated him in his own facility, in front of his own security apparatus, and then helped him to his feet while fleeing the scene. He saw her face from the ground, from a position of helplessness, while she escaped. That image did not leave him. It became the organizing principle of a decades-long vendetta. Homer is the permanent consequence of that vendetta. Not the intended consequence. Burns was not thinking about what driving Mona underground would do to her 6-year-old son. He was thinking about punishment and control, and the message he was sending to anyone else who might consider challenging his operations. Homer is the collateral damage. But the damage is so complete and so specific that it might as well have been engineered. A motherless boy growing up in a contaminated town, educated in schools whose programs were gutted when Burns stole their oil well, breathing and drinking the output of a facility Burns deliberately refuses to bring up to code, ending up cognitively impaired in ways that make him the perfect employee for the exact facility whose products helped impair him. Homer is the accidental masterpiece of Burns's system. Every force Burns applied to Springfield, the contamination, the economic control, the withdrawal of resources, the personal pursuit of anyone who threatened him, produced Homer Simpson. The person Burns most needed in Sector 7G. The person most incapable of understanding why he is there. The predictions and what they tell us about Springfield as a cultural object. There is a version of the predictions phenomenon that does not get discussed, and it is the most interesting version. When The Simpsons depicts something in 1998, and it comes true in 2019, the conventional analysis is, the writers were observant, they extrapolated a trend, it happened, this is impressive if not supernatural. And the debunking analysis is, they made thousands of predictions, a few landed, confirmation bias makes the hits visible, and the misses invisible. This is impressive but not supernatural. Both of these analyses treat the predictions as complete events. The show made a prediction, time passed. The prediction came true or did not. End of story. But there is a third analysis that treats the predictions as incomplete events, events that are still occurring, and that analysis is considerably stranger. Consider the Disney-Fox merger prediction. The show depicted a mega-corporation swallowing a competitor modeled on 20th Century Fox. This was satire. It was based on observable trends in media consolidation. It was the logical extrapolation of a visible pattern. And then Disney actually bought Fox in 2019, at which point the prediction became famous, was shared widely across social media, entered the cultural conversation as evidence of the show's prophetic capacity. Millions of people who did not watch the original episode became aware of it through the post-merger viral circulation, which means that the episode's cultural life did not end when it aired in 1998, it continued. It accumulated relevance over 20 years, and when the event it depicted finally occurred, the episode became newly significant in ways it had not been before. The prediction was not a single event in 1998. It was an event that began in 1998 and completed in 2019. The gap between the episode and the reality is not the distance between a prediction and its confirmation. It is the distance between an observation and its destination. The Simpsons has hundreds of episodes still in transit. Observations made in 1996 or 2004 or 2011, sitting in the archive, waiting to connect with future events that will retrospectively make them famous. The show's prediction history is not a closed list of hits and misses. It is an ongoing process. Episodes that nobody thinks about right now will become viral predictions when the events they depicted eventually occur. Episodes that seem like confirmed predictions today will be reconsidered when more context becomes available. The list is not settled because the future is not settled. This means that The Simpsons as a cultural object is still growing. Not in terms of new episodes, though those continue, in terms of retrospective significance. Every year, future events turn archived episodes into prophecies that did not know they were prophecies. The show's relationship to the culture that produced it, and that it has helped shape, is not a simple reflection. It is a dynamic, ongoing exchange that neither side fully controls. Springfield observes America. America becomes what Springfield observed. Springfield's observation of what America is becoming becomes part of the cultural environment that shapes what America becomes. The feedback loop does not have a clear origin or a clear terminus. It just runs, which is, in its own way, another version of the loop that defines Springfield itself. The town that cannot change. The culture that keeps catching up to the observations the town made about it. The prediction mechanism that keeps generating new accuracy as the future keeps arriving. The loop just runs. In Springfield and outside it. The floating timeline, as American mythology. The floating timeline is not unique to The Simpsons. Many long-running fictional properties manage their characters' ages through similar mechanisms. Superman has been in his early 30s for 80 years. James Bond is always roughly the same age regardless of when the film was made. Sherlock Holmes has no reliable birth year because the stories were written over decades by an author who was not initially planning a continuous narrative. The convention exists wherever a fictional character has outlasted the period in which they were created. What is unusual about The Simpsons is the transparency of the mechanism when applied to a realistic family drama. Superman does not age because he is not human, and his mythology accommodates timelessness as a feature of his nature. Bond does not age because each film is designed to be largely self-contained, and the franchise relies on casting changes to absorb temporal displacement. But The Simpsons is a realistic family. The Simpson family is not mythological. They do not have any in-universe justification for not aging. They are ordinary people in an ordinary town, or a town that presents itself as ordinary and ordinary people age. The fact that they do not is not an aspect of their fictional nature. It is a contradiction the show generates in its own premise every year that passes. This contradiction is what makes the floating timeline philosophically interesting in The Simpsons in a way it is not in other press properties. The show is not asking you to believe that its characters are timeless. It is asking you to not notice that they are not aging when you would expect them to. It is relying on the same mechanism it depicts Springfield using to manage its own catastrophes. A collective agreement not to ask the obvious question. The audience has been party to the same social contract that the residents of Springfield enforce with a judge's decree and a railroad car. We have agreed not to notice. And in return for our agreement, we get to keep going home to Springfield every week. The flash-forward episodes are the show's most honest moments about this arrangement because they acknowledge it rather than relying on it invisibly. Lisa's wedding. Bart to the future. The episode where Bart is a burnt-out loser in his 40s and Lisa is the president and Homer and Marge have finally separated. These episodes exist in the future because the show knows that showing the future is the only way to let the characters age. In the present, they cannot. In the future, a future that the floating present will never reach, they can be older, changed. The people time would have made them. The flash forward is the show's way of acknowledging the people these characters would become without committing to the consequence of showing them becoming it. Lisa at 23 is a profoundly specific vision. The episode understands who she would be in ways that are only available to writers who have spent years thinking about who she is at 8. The same intelligence, turned toward the specific problems of a young adult woman who is too smart for the town she grew up in and is not sure she is smart enough for the one she has arrived in. The same moral seriousness, now attached to adult stakes rather than childhood ones. The same loneliness, now named rather than simply felt. The episode proves that the show can do this, can see these characters clearly in their adult forms, can tell their adult stories with the same precision it tells their childhood ones. And then it takes Lisa back to 8. Because the alternative is to let her grow up, and letting her grow up means the show ends in a specific way, not with a final episode, but with the passage of time, making the show's premise obsolete. You cannot run a sitcom about a 10-year-old and an 8-year-old forever if they age. Eventually they are adults, and the show is about different things, and the family has a different shape, and the reason people watched in the first place, the yellow family on the couch, young and chaotic and intact, is gone. The flash forward exists to prove it can be done. The return to the present exists to prove it will not be. Springfield keeps its children young because Springfield's children being young is the show's reason for being. The moment they age, the reason is gone. And the show is not ready for the reason to be gone. And neither, it turns out, are we. Maggie and Lisa, the two intelligences of Springfield. The Simpson family has two exceptional minds. One announces itself constantly and is punished for it. The other conceals itself deliberately and is invisible because of it. The contrast between Lisa and Maggie is not incidental to the show's argument about Springfield. It is the argument, compressed into a single family. Lisa Simpson has been fighting her entire life for recognition that the people around her are structurally unable to give her. Her intelligence is real. It is measurable. It produces consistently accurate assessments of the situations around her, which is itself remarkable given that she is 8 years old and navigating the most dysfunctional community in American television. She identifies environmental problems before the adults do. She recognizes political manipulation before the adults do. She understands the economic dynamics of situations that Homer cannot begin to parse. She is, by any reasonable intellectual measure, the most cognitively capable person in her immediate family and one of the most capable people in Springfield. And this intelligence has gotten her, across 36 seasons, approximately nothing. She is dismissed. She is patronized. She is told, implicitly and explicitly, that her intelligence is not what the community is organized to reward. Springfield rewards compliance, and Lisa is constitutionally incapable of compliance that contradicts what she knows to be true. She will not agree that the factory farm is good for the town just because the town wants to believe it. She will not pretend the political candidate is honest just because he is popular. She will not suppress the fact that she knows something when what she knows is important. Her intelligence is the part of her that keeps insisting on reality in a town that has built its entire social infrastructure on the management and suppression of reality. This is what Maggie observed from infancy. This is the data point that shaped her strategic decision about how to operate in Springfield. She watched the most intelligent person in the family deploy her intelligence as visibly and as forcefully as possible, and she watched the outcome: dismissed, isolated, exhausted by the effort of constant resistance to a community that does not want to be improved. Lisa's intelligence is the weapon she wields against the world, and it barely makes a dent. The world absorbs the blows and continues as before. Maggie drew the obvious conclusion. If visible intelligence produces isolation and resistance, then visible intelligence is a tactical error. The correct approach, for a mind operating in Springfield, is to be invisible, to present as exactly what the environment expects, and to operate in the spaces the environment consequently stops monitoring. To build your capacity in silence, to execute your decisions below the radar, and to appear at all times to be exactly the kind of person that adults decide requires no particular attention or oversight. Maggie does this perfectly. She does it so perfectly that the show can run 36 seasons with her as a regular presence, and the majority of viewers experience her as a background character. She is the baby. She is the one who does not talk. She is the one who falls down when she tries to walk. She is the one who communicates in pacifier sounds and expressive looks and the occasional point of a finger. She is, to casual observation, exactly what she appears to be. An ordinary infant in a cartoon family, present because the family has 3 children, not because she has anything in particular to contribute. This is Maggie's masterwork. Not the shooting, not the daycare rebellion, not the demonstrated intelligence that standard testing cannot capture. The masterwork is the disguise. The masterwork is 36 years of a supremely capable mind, presenting as a not yet capable infant, so completely and so consistently that the disguise has never failed. Nobody in Springfield has figured out what Maggie is. Nobody in the audience watching Springfield has fully reckoned with what Maggie is. Because Maggie has made certain that the information required to figure it out is available only if you are paying very close attention to a character the show has told you not to pay close attention to. She has hidden herself in plain sight, in the most visible spot in the most famous cartoon family in television history, for 36 years. Whatever Maggie is building toward, whatever the endgame is, for a mind of that caliber, operating at that level of concealment for that long, the show has not revealed it. It has given us glimpses. The trigger mimicry, the Academy Award-nominated display of capability in the daycare film, the intelligence scores that break the measurement instrument, the family's implicit trust in her judgment when judgment is called for. But the full shape of what Maggie intends is still behind the pacifier, behind the enormous eyes, behind 36 years of deliberate, strategic, impeccably maintained silence. She is 1 year old. She has been 1 year old for 36 years. She has been watching everything and storing everything and waiting for something. What she is waiting for, the show does not say. What she will do when she decides the moment has arrived, nobody in Springfield will see coming, because that is exactly how she designed it. Springfield as America, the final argument. All the theories point here eventually. The radiation theory, the coma theory, the denial infrastructure, the immortal billionaire, the floating timeline, the geographic impossibility, the predictions that shape the culture they appear to predict. They all arrive at the same conclusion from different directions. Springfield is not a parody of America. It is a diagnosis of America. It is what you see when you look at the structure of American life, without the ideological softening that makes the structure livable. The nuclear power plant is the American industrial economy, powerful, profitable, contaminating the people who depend on it, managed by someone who has no interest in the contamination, because the contamination does not affect him in the ways it affects everyone else. Burns is the American oligarchy, old money, older still in Burns's specific case, surviving and thriving through the strategic use of resources that ordinary people cannot access, making himself too expensive to challenge and too necessary to remove. Homer is the American working class, cognitively impaired not by nature but by environment, kept in place not by law but by a combination of dependency and damage that makes resistance practically impossible, genuinely loving his family and genuinely unable to protect them from the system he works for. Marge is the American family, patient beyond what patience should require, functional despite circumstances that should produce dysfunction, the load-bearing element of a structure that would collapse without her and that does not give her adequate credit for what she sustains. And Lisa is the American conscience, always present, always articulate, always right about what is happening and what it means, always ignored by the people who would have to change their behavior in response to what she is saying. Lisa has been right about Springfield for 36 years. She has been right about the plant and right about Burns and right about the contamination and right about the community's systematic suppression of uncomfortable truths. And Springfield has been ignoring her for 36 years with the cheerful consistency of a community that has decided that being right is less important than being comfortable. This is America, not a particular moment in America or a particular political configuration of America. The underlying structure of America, the way power reproduces itself by making its own necessity appear natural, the way communities suppress the information that would require them to change, the way families love each other genuinely and completely while also being the mechanism by which the damage of one generation is transferred to the next, the way individuals carry the weight of systems they did not design and cannot see clearly enough to exit, the way someone like Burns can go on indefinitely because the system that sustains him is also the system that sustains everyone around him, and dismantling it would require dismantling the ground they stand on. Springfield is American because America is Springfield. The show held up the mirror. We stared into it for 36 years and started to look like what we were looking at. And now the three-eyed fish are swimming in actual rivers. and the cracked cooling towers are actual infrastructure, and the safety inspector is an actual person with an actual IQ of 55 and an actual employment guarantee. From an actual billionaire, and nobody is asking the obvious question, because the obvious question leads to a confrontation with the plant, and the plant is the economy, and the economy is everything. And so we look at the fish and we say, well, that is just how things are around here, and we go home. Springfield has been telling us this for 36 years, one episode at a time, one detail at a time, one three-eyed fish and one cracked cooling tower and one forgotten catastrophe at a time. Springfield has been telling us this. The question is the same one it has always been. The question the show has been asking since December of 1989. The question that Lisa has been asking in one form or another since she could hold a saxophone. Why are we all like this? And the answer, which the show has embedded in every yellow face and four-fingered hand and impossible recovery and perpetual reset, and billionaire who glows in the dark, and baby who chooses silence, and principal who became someone else, and Ned who prays to a god that talks to Homer instead? The answer that all the theories point toward from all their different directions is this. Because the plant is still running, because the water is still contaminated, because the man who owns the plant is still alive, because the safety inspector is still asleep at his workstation, because the town is still voting to forget, because the loop is still running, because we are still watching, because Springfield will always be here when we need to go home. And some nights, that is enough. You know where to find us. The mechanics of Springfield's reset. How a town forgets. The principal and the pauper gave us the machinery. But the machinery was running long before season 9. It has been running since the beginning. The question worth spending time with is not just what the machinery is, but how it achieves what it achieves with such perfect consistency across 36 years and 788 episodes. The reset is Springfield's most fundamental operation. After every catastrophe, every revelation, every event that should permanently alter the landscape of the show, the next episode begins from a baseline that incorporates none of what just happened. The town has been physically destroyed multiple times. It has been sealed under a dome by the federal government. It has been invaded, irradiated, struck by weather events of biblical proportion, and subjected to Burns's various schemes, including the literal removal of the sun from the sky. And every time, by the following episode, everything is back to normal. Not because the damage has been repaired, sometimes the show simply declines to acknowledge that the damage occurred at all. The town does not recover. It resets. The fan term for this is episodic storytelling. The explanation is that long-running shows, particularly animated ones, cannot maintain continuity across every episode without eventually writing themselves into corners they cannot escape. The reset is a practical solution to a narrative problem. This is true at the production level, and it is the explanation every writer on the show would give if you ask them. But the theories say the reset is not incidental, it is thematic. It is the show's central argument about how communities manage reality. Think about what real communities do when they encounter information that would require fundamental changes to their self-understanding. They negotiate with it. They contextualize it. They find the reading of it that is most compatible with continuing as they were. They find reasons why the catastrophe was an anomaly. Why the scandal does not represent the institution. Why the evidence is ambiguous. Why the expert who is saying alarming things is exaggerating. They do not necessarily do this consciously or dishonestly. They do it because the alternative, genuinely incorporating the disturbing information and allowing it to change the community's behavior, is enormously costly. It requires changing practices that are comfortable. It requires acknowledging that the people who benefited from the problematic situation were benefiting from something harmful. It requires accountability, which is always more expensive than amnesia. Springfield's reset is a cartoon rendering of this very human process. The catastrophe happens. The community acknowledges it briefly, and then, through a mechanism that is sometimes explicit and sometimes implied, the acknowledgement is withdrawn. The catastrophe is reclassified as an anomaly or forgotten entirely. The baseline is restored, and the process that produced the catastrophe, the plant, the Burns empire, the compromised medical establishment, the bought political class, continues unchanged. The principal and the pauper was so upsetting to the audience not because the reset itself was unusual. The show resets every episode. What was unusual was the explicitness. The show usually manages the reset between episodes. in the gap between one Friday and the next, where the audience does not see it happen. The principal and the pauper manage the reset on screen, in real time, with full transparency about what was occurring and why. The vote, the decree, the exile, the announcement that the truth is now illegal. The show made the reset visible, and the audience responded to its visibility with the discomfort that the reset is always designed to prevent. The reset works because it is invisible. The moment it becomes visible, it stops being comfortable and starts being disturbing. And a disturbing reset is a reset that has failed. This is why the episode is so persistently unpopular, not because it was creatively weaker than the episodes around it, not because Harry Shearer was wrong to object to the treatment of a character he had voiced for a decade, but because it forced the audience to see themselves in the voting townspeople. It forced them to acknowledge that they too participate in Springfield's consensus reality. That every time they watch the next episode and accept that everything is fine despite what happened in the last one, they are casting their own vote for the comfortable lie over the uncomfortable truth. The episode said, "You do this. You are Springfield." And the audience did not like being told that. They were not wrong to dislike it, but they were wrong to think the wrongness was in the episode rather than in the mirror the episode was holding up. Ned Flanders, and the question of what goodness is for. There is a reading of Ned Flanders that the show does not fully endorse but that the accumulated evidence supports. In this reading, Ned is not merely unfortunate. He is the show's deliberate argument against a certain kind of goodness. The goodness Ned practices is goodness as performance, not in the sense that it is insincere. Ned's kindness is real, within the constraints of his conditioning, but in the sense that it is oriented outward. It is designed to be seen, to be recognized, to produce a specific social outcome, the reputation of being a good man. Ned is generous because generosity is what good people do, and Ned has decided to be a good person. He is patient because patience is what good people practice, and Ned has decided to practice all the things good people practice. His goodness is constructed. It is assembled from the outside in. He has looked at the cultural definition of a good Christian neighbor, and he has built himself to that specification as precisely as his childhood conditioning allowed. The show's argument, not stated directly but visible in the accumulation of what happens to Ned, is that this kind of goodness is insufficient. It is insufficient not because it is hypocritical but because it is reactive rather than generative. Ned is good in response to external definitions of goodness. He does what good people are supposed to do. He does not ask, in any fundamental way, whether what good people are supposed to do is actually producing good outcomes. He forgives Homer because forgiveness is what good people do, not because Homer has given him any reason to believe that forgiveness is having any effect on Homer's behavior. He turns the other cheek because that is what his faith instructs, not because turning the other cheek is working in any discernible way. He practices the forms of goodness without examining whether the forms are accomplishing anything. Homer, who is not good in any of the ways Ned is good, occasionally produces genuine goodness through sheer accidental love. Homer does not follow the rules of goodness. He does not know what the rules are. But his feeling for his family is real and undirected, and sometimes it produces something, a moment of genuine connection, an impulsive act of love, a reflex of protection that Ned's carefully constructed goodness cannot replicate, because Ned's goodness is too rule-bound to respond to situations the rules did not anticipate. God talks to Homer not because Homer is better than Ned, but because Homer needs the conversation more urgently, and because Homer's relationship to the divine is genuine in a way that Ned's is not quite. Ned's faith is part of his identity construction. Homer's faith, such as it is, inconsistent and impulsive and theologically incoherent, is not performed for anyone's benefit, including his own. When Homer has a conversation with God, it is because Homer is actually genuinely trying to understand something that he cannot figure out on his own. Ned's prayers are addressed to a God who knows Ned does not actually need the answer. He already knows the answer. The answer is whatever his faith tells him is the right thing to do. He does not need divine guidance. He has already decided to be good, and he has already defined what good means. The conversation with God would be redundant. Homer needs the conversation, so he gets it. This is not a moral statement about prayer or faith. It is the show's observation about what different kinds of goodness actually are and what they are actually for. Ned's goodness is for Ned. It is the framework that allows Ned to understand himself as a certain kind of person. Homer's goodness, the real moments of it, the ones that exist underneath the stupidity and the selfishness and the decades of radiation-impaired judgment, is for his family. It has no other purpose. It does not make Homer a good person in the recognizable social sense. It just makes him love his family. In Springfield, where goodness as performance is consistently unrewarded, and goodness as love is consistently visible in the show's emotional center, love without performance is the only kind that actually counts. Ned performs goodness. Homer performs something that is not goodness at all. And at the center of each of their lives, the show places a fact about what the performance produces. Ned's wife is dead. Homer's wife is still there. The Molman problem and what it says about death in Springfield? Hans Molman's deaths deserve more sustained attention than they usually receive because the specific pattern of his deaths is different from the pattern of other characters' close calls in ways that become interesting when examined carefully. Many Springfield characters have near-death experiences. Homer has them constantly. Bart regularly survives things that should kill him. Krusty has had heart attacks. Principal Skinner has been in various situations of mortal peril. The show is not shy about placing its characters in danger. But for most characters, the danger is survived through luck or resilience or cartoon physics. The character comes close to death and does not die. Molman dies. This is the specific distinction. The show depicts him not as narrowly surviving fatal situations, but as actually ceasing to function. He is consumed. He is incinerated. He is crushed in ways where the visual gag is the completeness of the destruction, rather than the narrowness of his escape. He dies. And then he is back. This makes him categorically different from other Springfield characters who face danger. His relationship to death is not one of survival against the odds. It is one of returning from it. And returning from death is a different thing from surviving danger, biologically and narratively, and philosophically. The radiation theory handles this with a specific mechanism. Molman cells have been so thoroughly altered by long-term radioactive exposure that death itself has become negotiable for him. The normal cellular processes that make death permanent, the cascade of failures that prevents biological reconstitution once vital systems have ceased, have been disrupted in Molman-specific biology in ways that allow reconstitution after the cascade has begun. He is not the only Springfield resident with unusual biology. Homer's healing is unusual. Burns' survival is unusual. But Molman's biology takes the mutation further than anyone else. Where Homer heals from damage, Molman reconstitutes from death. Where Burns maintains disease equilibrium through weekly intervention, Molman maintains biological continuity through some mechanism the contamination has produced in his specific cellular structure that does not require any external input at all. His stated age of 31 is the piece that gives the radiation theory its most disturbing specific application. If Molman is actually 31, and if his current appearance accurately reflects his physical condition, then the contamination has aged him by approximately 60 years beyond what his chronological age would predict. He looks 90, and he is 31. The radiation that made him unkillable also dramatically accelerated the externally visible markers of aging. It gave him immortality and took his youth simultaneously. He cannot die. He cannot be young. He exists in permanent visible old age, returning from deaths that accumulate around him with regularity, unable to age further and unable to stop the process that has already happened, in a town that treats his death cycle as background noise. Molman once tried to show a movie. The movie was titled Man Getting Hit by Football. This was the entry he submitted to the Springfield Film Festival. He wrote it, he directed it, he starred in it, and he was very proud of it. The town laughed. Not with him. At the premise, at the simplicity, at the gap between Molman's evident pride in this work and the work itself. He was humiliated. He presented something that mattered to him, and the community treated it as a joke. Molman is, in the end, the most complete emblem of what Springfield does to people who fall below a certain threshold of power or social standing. He is hurt, repeatedly, without consequence for anyone causing the hurt. He is ignored, consistently, despite being visibly and measurably a person with interior life and preferences and creative output. He dies, regularly, and nobody notices or asks how he keeps coming back. He exists at the absolute margin of Springfield's social concern, present enough to be in the frame, invisible enough that his presence generates no particular obligation in anyone around him. He is 31 years old. and he has already died dozens of times, and he will be back next week. The same as always. In the background. Waiting for the next thing to happen to him. Why the loop runs. The final theory. Every theory we have examined tonight is, at its core, a theory about why things do not change in Springfield. Why the plant keeps running. Why Burns keeps surviving. Why Homer stays impaired. Why Maggie stays silent. Why nobody ages. Why the resets always work. Why the loop keeps looping. The radiation theory says the loop runs because the contamination has created biological and neurological conditions that prevent the kind of thinking required to break it. The coma theory says the loop runs because it is a dream and dreams loop by nature. The denial infrastructure theory says the loop runs because communities choose the loop over the alternative. The floating timeline theory says the loop runs because we choose it, because the audience is the final mechanism in the loop's operation, and the loop cannot stop without our consent. And our consent has never been withdrawn. 36 years, 788 episodes. Every Sunday night at 8, the couch gag plays and the family sits down and the loop continues for another half hour. We have been choosing the loop every week for 36 years. We have been pressing play on Homer's dream, on the contaminated town, on the denial infrastructure, on the floating timeline. We have been choosing it because the alternative, the show ending, the family aging, the loop stopping is not something we are prepared for. The Simpsons will end someday. The show will produce a final episode. Homer will go to the nuclear plant for the last time, or Bart will do something for the last time, or the family will sit on the couch for the last time, and the credits will roll, and there will not be another episode next week. This will happen. It is inevitable. Every loop eventually runs out of the energy sustaining it. But we are not ready for it yet. And Springfield knows we are not ready. The show knows. The writers know. The characters know. In whatever sense characters can know anything. And so the loop keeps running. Because as long as it runs, Homer is still dreaming. The family is still young. The house is still full. The plant is still running. Burns is still alive. Maggie is still watching. Lisa is still asking. Bart is still 10. And we can still go home to Evergreen Terrace. On a Sunday, at 8, when we need to, the crayon, the brain, and the choice to be dumb. Season 12, Episode 9, HOMR. Homer discovers, through a series of medical tests, that he has a crayon lodged in his left frontal lobe. It has been there since childhood. Nobody knows precisely when it was inserted or exactly how it got there, though the episode provides a flashback suggesting Homer inserted it himself as a child by pushing a crayon up his nose. The crayon has been there ever since, pressing against brain tissue, physically obstructing neurological function in the region of the brain most associated with higher cognitive processes. When the crayon is removed, Homer's IQ rises immediately and dramatically. He becomes a different person. This episode is treated, in most analyses, as a one-off comedy premise with an emotional core. Homer discovers he could have been smarter, is smarter briefly, finds smart Homer unhappy, and chooses to return to his normal state. Funny premise, touching resolution, move on. But the episode is doing something more complex than that, and the complexity becomes visible when you look at it alongside the radiation theory and alongside the broader question of what Burns's Springfield is designed to produce. Smart Homer is unsettling not because he becomes arrogant or detached or unrecognizable. He remains fundamentally Homer in his values and his emotional orientation. He still loves his family. He still wants the same things from his life. He is just capable, for the first time, of understanding his situation with clarity. He looks at his job and understands what it actually is. He looks at the plant and understands what the plant is actually doing. He looks at his employer and understands the relationship between himself and his employer with a precision that cognitively impaired Homer has never been capable of. And the understanding is unbearable. The clarity of perception that his restored intelligence provides is not a gift, it is a burden. Because what he can now see clearly is exactly the situation described by the radiation theory. A man trapped in a contaminated town working for the man who contaminated it, unable to leave because the system has been designed to prevent his leaving, sustained by an intellectual impairment that prevents him from understanding the architecture of his own imprisonment. Smart Homer sees all of this, and he chooses to stop seeing it. He has the crayon reinserted. He chooses impairment over clarity. He chooses the fog over the knowledge. He chooses to be the kind of person who throws a donut into the reactor to see what happens, rather than the kind of person who knows what happens and cannot stop seeing it. The show presents this as Homer choosing happiness over misery, the misery of intelligence, the happiness of comfortable ignorance. And that framing is emotionally accurate as far as it goes. Smart Homer is miserable. Regular Homer is not, or not in the same way. The choice is real. The misery is real. The happiness, such as it is also real. But there is another framing available, one the show gestures toward without fully committing to. Smart Homer chose not to fight. He looked at the system, the plant, the contamination, the employer who has been managing his impairment since before he was old enough to understand what was being managed, and he decided that fighting the system was less tolerable than being managed by it. He decided that the comfort of not knowing was preferable to the suffering of knowing and being unable to change anything. He chose surrender. He chose the crayon. He chose to become, again, exactly the kind of person Burns's system requires him to be. This choice is the show's most honest moment about Springfield's real problem. The problem is not that the people of Springfield are too stupid to see what is happening to them. The problem is that the few who do see, the few whose clarity is sufficient to produce understanding, consistently decide that the cost of acting on what they see is too high to pay. Mona Simpson saw and acted and paid the full price for 30 years. Homer Simpson saw briefly and chose to stop seeing. Lisa Simpson sees and acts constantly and has not yet paid the full price, but is being systematically prepared to, by a community that finds her clarity inconvenient. The crayon is not an accident of Homer's childhood that shaped his life. The crayon is a metaphor the show uses to tell you something about the kind of clarity that is available in Springfield and what it costs to maintain it. Anyone in Springfield could, theoretically, see what is happening. Most of them are too impaired to access that level of clarity in the first place. The few who can access it discover very quickly that having it is not comfortable. And of those few, most eventually find a way to stop. Marge doesn't push too hard on things she half understands. Grandpa made his deal with Burns and stopped asking questions. Abe buried the truth about Mona and directed Homer to a dead poet's gravestone. Homer had the crayon put back in. The crayon is the choice that Springfield makes, over and over, at every level of its social structure. The choice to stop knowing. The choice to accept the comfortable impairment over the unbearable clarity. The choice that keeps the plant running and Burns alive and Homer in Sector 7G and the three-eyed fish swimming in the river where the children fish on summer afternoons. The system does not force this choice, exactly, but it makes the alternative so costly that the choice, for most people in Springfield, is not really a choice at all. The geography of Springfield and the geography of denial. Let us spend some time with the specific geographic impossibilities of Springfield, because they are stranger than a casual description. Makes them sound and stranger still when you consider them alongside what the town does to evidence and testimony that contradicts its preferred version of reality. Springfield has bordered Ohio, it has bordered Nevada, it has bordered Maine and Kentucky, and any number of other states that are not adjacent to each other. It has had oceanfront property and mountain ranges, and desert terrain and farmland, and Arctic weather and tropical heat within the same zip code. The state abbreviation NT does not correspond to any American state. The area code that has been associated with Lisa's phone is a Missouri area code, but Missouri is a landlocked state and Springfield has a harbor. The Capitol building of Springfield State has been depicted in configurations consistent with several different state capitals and inconsistent with all of them. The show has done this deliberately and consistently for 36 years. It is not continuity error in the ordinary sense. It is policy. The creative team has actively maintained the impossibility, correcting occasional slips toward specificity and reintroducing contradictions whenever resolution appears to be approaching. Groening's 2012 admission that Springfield was inspired by Springfield, Oregon, was the closest the show has come to official resolution. The writers responded by producing episodes that contradicted the Oregon theory. The mystery was reopened within months of the official answer. This is worth sitting with. The show's creator publicly stated which real location inspired the fictional one. The writers who work for the show created content that made the creator's statement false. They chose the mystery over the answer even when the answer came from the highest possible source. Even when Matt Groening himself tried to close the question, Springfield remained open. Why? The surface answer is the one we discussed earlier. Universal identification. The town that could be anywhere belongs to everyone. A specific Springfield would belong to the people who live near it and feel vaguely adjacent to everyone else. An unlocatable Springfield belongs to every viewer regardless of their actual geography. This is strategically sound from a creative standpoint, and the writers have confirmed it is the intention. But there is a more disturbing version of the same answer, which is that Springfield's geographic unfixity is not just a gift to the audience, but a protection for the town. You cannot regulate a town you cannot locate. You cannot investigate an environmental disaster if the disaster's location is perpetually ambiguous. The EPA dome in the Simpsons movie is the closest thing Springfield has ever had to real external regulatory intervention, and the dome went up specifically because Springfield's contamination had reached a point so extreme that the federal government could no longer afford to treat it as one jurisdiction's problem. The dome was the moment Springfield's geographic flexibility failed to protect it. And the dome came down again by the end of the movie. The protection was restored. No real state has clean jurisdiction over the Springfield nuclear power plant because nobody can establish which state Springfield is in. Burns's plant operates in regulatory limbo as a direct consequence of the town's geographic ambiguity. The 342 violations that the surprise inspection found are violations against some states' regulatory code. But which state? The state's attorney general responsible for prosecuting Burns would need to establish that Springfield falls within their jurisdiction before they could file a case. And Springfield's jurisdiction, like Springfield's location, is perpetually unclear. Burns has not constructed this ambiguity deliberately, any more than he constructed the show's floating timeline deliberately, but he benefits from it as directly as if he had. His plant operates without clean regulatory oversight because his town is not cleanly located in any regulatory framework. The geographic impossibility and the regulatory impossibility are the same impossibility. Springfield is unlocatable in space and therefore unaccountable in law. The three-eyed fish swim in a river whose contamination source is subject to no clear legal authority. The luminous rats run through a facility whose violations have never produced a successful prosecution. The people with 4 fingers and yellow skin live in a town that exists, legally speaking, in approximately the same place that Brigadoon exists. Present when you look for it. Gone when you try to get a court order served there. This is why the geographic mystery matters beyond its narrative interest. It is not just a charming puzzle the show maintains for audience enjoyment. It is the legal architecture of Burns's continued impunity. Springfield floats between states because floating is safer than landing. Landing means accountability, and in 36 years, Springfield has never landed. Homer, Burns, and the structure of dependency. The relationship between Homer Simpson and Charles Montgomery Burns is the show's central relationship, not Homer and Marge, which is the show's central love story, and not Homer and Bart, which is the show's central father-son dynamic. The relationship that structures everything else is the one between the man who works in the plant and the man who runs it. This relationship is almost never examined directly on the show. It is taken as given. Homer works for Burns. Burns employs Homer. The specifics of this arrangement are never interrogated by either party, because interrogating them would require Homer to possess the cognitive architecture that the arrangement has helped to prevent him from developing. Burns can remember many things about many people, but he cannot remember Homer's name. He has a particular kind of selective memory that tends toward the details of power, who owes him what, who has information he needs, who is useful and in what capacity, and away from the details of the people whose usefulness is so complete and so passive that they require no particular individual attention. Homer does not require Burns to know his name. Homer just requires the job. And the job has been guaranteed regardless of Homer's performance by the deal Burns made with Grandpa. Burns does not need to remember Homer's name. He just needs Homer to show up. The power differential in this relationship is so extreme as to be almost invisible. When a power differential is very large, it stops appearing as a relationship and starts appearing as a fact of nature. Homer going to work at the plant and Burns being there to employ him feels as natural and as inevitable as gravity. It feels that way because it has always been that way, for Homer's entire adult life, and because every aspect of Homer's psychology, the crayon, the radiation exposure, the maternal loss, the grandpa deal has prepared him to experience it as natural and inevitable, rather than as a constructed arrangement that someone built and someone maintains for reasons of their own. Burns maintains it because it serves him, not because of any specific affection for Homer or any specific intention to harm him, but because Homer in this position is useful. Homer at the plant, failing to perform the safety inspection function, ensures the violations continue unaddressed. Homer at the plant, incapable of connecting his situation to its historical causes, poses no threat to Burns's narrative about what the plant is and what it does. Homer at the plant, grateful for job security he does not know was purchased by his father's silence about a crime, is the ideal employee. Loyal through dependency, compliant through psychological damage, present through contractual obligation that he does not know exists. Homer loves his family genuinely and completely. This is not in question. His love for Marge and Bart and Lisa and Maggie is the most real thing in the show and possibly the most real thing about Homer Simpson as a character. But his love for his family is also, from Burns's perspective, a perfect mechanism of control. A man who loves his family and is terrified of losing them will tolerate conditions at his workplace that a man without that specific terror would not tolerate. He will accept humiliation because the alternative is unemployment. And unemployment means losing the house, and losing the house means losing the family structure. That is the only thing keeping Homer's damaged psychology functional. Burns does not have to threaten Homer's family directly. He just has to be the employer. The threat is structural. Homer can feel it without seeing it. And feeling it is enough to keep him in Sector 7G, donut in hand, 40 hours a week, year after year, for over 30 years without meaningful resistance. This is what the Mona Simpson story adds to the picture. Burns did not just take Homer's mother. He took the development of the alternative version of Homer that would have existed if his mother had stayed. Smart Homer, crayon-free Homer, Homer raised by two parents in a functional household in a contaminated but navigable Springfield, that Homer might have had the cognitive resources to see the plant for what it was, might have had the emotional security to resist the specific fear of abandonment that makes the current Homer so manageable, might have, at some point in his adult life, done what Mona did in 1969. Looked at the thing Burns was operating and decided to do something about it. Burns made sure that Homer would not be that person. Not through deliberate child-rearing intervention, but through the collateral damage of pursuing Mona. He sent her underground. Homer grew up motherless and damaged and afraid. He arrived at the plant as the perfect employee for a facility that needed a perfect non-inspector. And the deal with Grandpa ensured he would stay there, regardless of performance, for as long as the plant ran. Homer is in Sector 7G because Burns drove Mona into hiding 30 years ago. The radiation that impairs him was already there before he started working at the plant. His cognitive limitations were shaped by the same system before he was old enough to understand what a system was. He was prepared for this job, in the most specific and most tragic sense, by the man who gives him the job. Burns did not intend to create Homer Simpson. He intended to silence Mona Simpson. Homer is the side effect. The unintended masterpiece of Burns's system. Exactly the person the system needed, produced exactly by the system's operation, arriving exactly when needed, for exactly the job that needed doing. And neither of them will ever understand this fully. Homer because he cannot. Burns because he does not need to. The Simpsons and time. 36 years of a single Sunday evening. Consider what it means that The Simpsons has been on the air since December of 1989. People who were born that year are now in their mid-30s. They have grown from infants who would not have been awake for the first broadcast to adults who may have children of their own who are now watching the show. The show has been running for the entire lifetimes of a significant portion of its current audience. For these viewers, there has never been a world without The Simpsons in it. The show is not something they discovered, it is something that was already there when they arrived. For older viewers, the relationship is different but equally deep. The show has been present for a significant portion of their adult lives. It has been the background noise of Sunday evenings for decades. It has been the reference point for an enormous number of cultural observations and shared jokes. It has been, for many people, part of the furniture of the culture they grew up in and continue to inhabit. You do not discover furniture, you live with it. The floating timeline, understood in this context, is not just a narrative device, it is a temporal experience. The audience has aged 36 years while watching characters who have not aged at all. The viewers who were children when the show started are middle-aged now. The viewers who were adults when the show started are elderly or gone. But Bart is still 10. Lisa is still 8. Homer and Marge are still in their mid-30s. Every viewer of the show is living a version of Homer's coma. They are watching their own past in the form of a family that does not age. The Springfield of 1992, when the show was at its creative peak, looks exactly like the Springfield of 2025. The same yellow faces, the same house, the same street, the same plant on the hill, the same family on the couch. The viewer has changed. Springfield has not. The viewer's life has accumulated time and consequence and growth and loss. Springfield's has not. This creates a relationship to the show that is not available to newer, shorter-running programs. The Simpsons is not just a television show for many of its viewers. It is a stable point in a life that has moved and changed around it. It is the one thing that looks the same as it did in childhood, or in early adulthood, or whenever the viewer began watching. The couch gag plays and the theme music starts, and for the next 22 minutes, the family is intact and young, and the house is the house, and Springfield is Springfield, and nothing has changed from the last time you sat down to watch. In a life where everything changes, relationships, bodies, circumstances, the world outside the window, The Simpsons does not change. This is why the floating timeline feels like more than a production convenience. It is a genuine gift, not an accident, not a compromise. A gift the show gives its audience. The one thing that will look the same on the night you watch it as it looked on any other night you have watched it for the past 36 years. The one stable element in a world of constant change. The one Sunday evening that is always the same Sunday evening, no matter which Sunday it actually is. Homer's dream keeps Springfield frozen to protect Homer from the reality of how much time has passed and what he has missed. The floating timeline keeps Springfield frozen to protect the audience from the same reality. Both the dream and the show perform the same function for their respective occupants. The show is Homer's dream, and like Homer's dream, it runs on the refusal to let the story arrive at its natural conclusion. The natural conclusion is the one where Bart turns 11 and Lisa turns 9, and Maggie finally says her second word, and Homer and Marge grow old, and the house on Evergreen Terrace eventually passes out of the family, where the kids move away and the couch holds fewer people, and the Sunday evenings that were once so full are quieter now. That is the natural conclusion of any family story. The passing of time and the changes it brings and the people who are no longer there for the Sunday evening, and the way you still feel their absence on every Sunday evening that comes after. The Simpsons will not give us that conclusion. Not yet. Not while there is still a Sunday evening to fill and an audience that needs to go home to Evergreen Terrace and find it exactly as they left it. Homer's dream refuses to end because the ending is what he cannot bear. The show refuses to age because aging is what we cannot bear. The loop keeps running because we keep watching. And some nights, sitting down and pressing play and hearing the opening notes and watching the yellow family fall through the couch in whatever configuration the couch gag has arranged them this week, the loop is not a trap. It is a door. It opens to the same place it always opens. A street in Springfield. A house at the end of it. A family inside. Young. Intact. Present. Home. Springfield will be here when you wake up. Burns' biological weapons program. The detail everyone ignores. The show introduced the biological weapons laboratory in the Mother Simpson episode, and then, as it does with most of its darkest implications, moved past it. Homer and Mona have their reunion. The FBI arrives. Mona flees. The emotional story of the episode is Homer's relationship with his mother and the grief of losing her again. The biological weapons program is context, backstory. The reason Mona became a fugitive. But the biological weapons program is more than backstory. It is the piece of information that, when placed alongside the radiation contamination, transforms the picture of what Burns has been doing in Springfield from merely catastrophically negligent to something considerably more intentional. Burns was not just running a nuclear power plant with 342 violations. He was also running a laboratory dedicated to the production of weaponized biological agents in the same community. He was operating two simultaneous programs of potential mass harm in a single town. One through the leakage of radioactive material into the water supply and the air and the soil, the other through the deliberate manufacture of pathogens designed to disable or kill human beings at scale. Both programs in the same location, both funded by the same wealth, both managed by the same man who also managed the political infrastructure necessary to prevent anyone from successfully challenging either operation. The germ warfare laboratory was eventually shut down. Mona's raid destroyed the agents stored inside. But the nuclear plant was not shut down. has never been shut down, has continued operating for decades after the biological weapons program ended, adding to its total of violations with each passing year, and adding to the total of radioactive contamination it has contributed to Springfield's environment. The biological weapons facility was one building. The plant is the entire energy infrastructure of the community. One could be closed, the other cannot, because the community depends on it for electricity. This dependency is the most sophisticated element of Burns's control of Springfield. He is not simply polluting the town for profit. He has structured the town's energy infrastructure so that the source of the contamination is also the source of the power. The thing killing Springfield is the thing keeping Springfield's lights on. You cannot remove the contamination without removing the infrastructure. You cannot remove the infrastructure without removing the power supply for every home and school and hospital and business in the community. You cannot challenge the plant without threatening the survival of everything that depends on it, and everything in Springfield depends on it. Burns has made himself the town's kidney, necessary and poisonous simultaneously. The organ that sustains the organism while also, slowly, producing the conditions that will eventually destroy it. Remove it and the organism dies immediately. Leave it and the organism deteriorates, gradually, losing cognitive function, developing three-eyed fish in its rivers, producing children with 4 fingers, sustaining a population too impaired to recognize the nature of its situation. The trade-off is between immediate death and slow degradation. Springfield has chosen degradation, as all communities in this situation choose degradation, because degradation is survivable in the short term and communities are oriented toward the short term. Burns chose this configuration deliberately when he built the plant. He did not need to build it in Springfield specifically. He could have built it outside the community, run power lines in, maintained physical distance between the production of electricity and the consumption of it. He built it in the middle of the community, inside the water catchment area, inside the airshed, inside the community's own backyard. He built it there because a plant inside the community produces a dependency that a plant outside the community does not. The dependency is the strategic core of the operation. The power, the employment, the economic vitality, all of it tied to a single facility that Burns owns and that Burns chooses how to operate. The contamination is not incidental to this arrangement. It is part of it. A community that is contaminated is a community that cannot effectively resist the contaminator. A community that is dependent on its contaminator for its survival is a community that has no practical choice about whether to resist. Springfield has no practical choice. It never did. The choice was made before most of its current residents were born. When Burns decided where to build the plant and how to operate it, and what the relationship between his facility and the community it served would look like, he made that choice. The community lives with it. Homer lives with it. His children will live with it. The fish in the river will keep developing extra eyes in the same river where the children fish on summer afternoons. And on Sunday evenings, the family will sit on the couch in the house that runs on electricity from the plant on the hill, and the television will turn on, and the show will start, and the couch gag will play, and everything will look exactly as it always looked. Because in Springfield, the look of things and the reality of things are two very different propositions, maintained in careful separation by an infrastructure of denial that has been running longer than most of the people inside it have been alive. Sideshow Bob's intelligence and the problem of having nowhere to put it. We talked about Bob earlier, but the full scope of what the show is saying through his character deserves more space. Bob is a Yale graduate operating in a town where most people's cognitive function has been compromised by decades of radiation exposure. He is, objectively and by a large margin, the most formally educated person in Springfield. He quotes Gilbert and Sullivan and performs operatic arias and references Dostoevsky in casual conversation. His intellectual range is genuine and broad, and in Springfield, it is almost completely useless. He has no one to talk to at his level. He has nowhere to deploy his education in any way that the community would recognize or reward. This matters because intelligence without application degrades. Not in the clinical sense, Bob's intelligence is not deteriorating from disuse the way a muscle degrades from inactivity, but its relationship to the world around it degrades. An intelligent person in an environment that cannot respond to their intelligence has no mechanism for calibrating their own capabilities against reality. They lose the corrective feedback that prevents intelligence from becoming grandiosity. They become certain that their judgments are right without the experience of having those judgments tested against other intelligent judgments and found wanting. They confuse the absence of challenge with the presence of superiority. Bob is this. He is not wrong that he is the most intelligent person in Springfield in terms of formal education and cultural breadth, but he has translated his intelligence into a self-assessment that his actual track record does not support. He is outwitted, repeatedly and consistently, by a 10-year-old boy whose brain has been developing in a contaminated environment for his entire life. The most educated person in Springfield cannot successfully execute a plan against a radiation-impaired child. And this gap between Bob's self-image, the brilliant Yale-educated schemer whose plans deserve to succeed, and his actual performance, a man who has been defeated by Bart Simpson at every turn for decades, is the core of what the show is saying about intelligence without context. Intelligence is not an absolute. It is relational. It functions within an environment and in relationship to other minds. In an environment where the other minds are significantly impaired, intelligence can feel like more than it is because there is nothing to challenge it. Bob has spent his adult life in Springfield being the smartest person in the room except when he is facing Bart. And against Bart, his intelligence consistently fails to produce the outcomes it predicts. Not because Bart is smarter than Bob in the formal sense, but because Bart has grown up inside a system that Bob approaches from outside. Bart knows Springfield in ways Bob does not. Bart has the insider's understanding of how the town works, how its people behave, what the escape routes are, and where the gaps in any plan will appear. And this embedded contextual intelligence, not the kind that Yale produces, but the kind that growing up in a specific place produces, defeats Bob's formal intelligence every time. Bob needs a worthy adversary, because without one he has no way to know what he actually is. Bart provides the only real test of Bob's capabilities that Springfield can offer. And Bart consistently demonstrates that Bob's capabilities are not what Bob believes they are. This should be devastating. For any person with a functional self-assessment mechanism, losing to a 10-year-old child over and over would produce a re-evaluation of how capable you actually are. But Bob's self-assessment mechanism is not calibrated to evidence. It is calibrated to his internal image of himself as the most intelligent person in any room he occupies. And against that internal image, no external evidence of failure can produce fundamental revision. The tragedy of Sideshow Bob is that he is, in the most technical sense, exactly right about his intelligence. He is the most educated and most broadly cultured person in Springfield. And it means nothing. Because intelligence in Springfield is not rewarded by the community, as we have established through Lisa. Because his intelligence has had no one to develop against for so long that it has become a closed system referencing itself. Because the only application he has found for his capabilities is the pursuit of a boy who consistently demonstrates that the capabilities are insufficient for even this purpose. And because the one time he achieved the goal his capabilities were deployed toward, he discovered immediately that the goal was not what he thought it was. The goal was the pursuit. The intelligence was not designed to succeed. It was designed to keep trying. Bob will keep trying. Springfield will keep being Springfield. Bart will keep being 10. The loop runs. The final night in Springfield. It is late. You have been in Springfield for a while now. You have walked through the contamination theory and felt the weight of what it implies about those yellow faces and 4 fingers. You have sat with the coma theory and let it do what it does, which is turn a comedy into a love letter from a sleeping man to the family he cannot reach. You have looked at the burns shooting from every angle and watched the official answer stay soft no matter how you press on it. You have watched Burns survive on schedule, week after week, through the engineering of a man who decided a century ago that dying was not an acceptable option and has spent every year since making sure it isn't. You have watched Maggie watching everything, storing everything, waiting with the patience of a mind that knows exactly what it is doing and exactly why it is doing it in exactly the way it is doing it. You have followed Mona Simpson from 1969 to the morning she kissed her sleeping son and disappeared, to the moment decades later when Homer found her at the wrong grave, to the episode where she left again, to the episode where she died holding his hand. You have watched Homer fail to connect the dots that would make his suffering comprehensible to him, and you have understood why he cannot connect them, and you have felt, maybe, something about that. Something about what it means to carry damage you cannot name, and to love people completely inside that limitation. You have visited the geographic impossibility of Springfield and understood it as gift and as shield simultaneously. You have watched the floating timeline float and understood it as the show's deepest contract with its audience. We will keep Springfield still if you keep coming back to it. We will keep the children young and the house full and the Sunday evening permanent if you keep choosing the loop. We will not let the story arrive at its natural conclusion as long as you are not ready for it to. And maybe you are not ready for it. Maybe nobody is. Maybe the show will run another 10 years. Another season, another episode, one more Sunday at 8, and the couch gag will play, and the family will sit down, and Maggie will watch, and Bart will push at the edges of whatever the rules are this week, and Lisa will play her saxophone somewhere upstairs, and Homer will open the refrigerator and look at what is inside with exactly the same expression he has worn for 36 years. And it will be enough. For one more episode, it will be enough. That is Springfield. That is why we keep going back. Not because the theories are resolved, not because the mysteries are solved, not because the plant has been shut down or Burns has finally been held accountable, or Homer has finally connected the dots, or Maggie has finally spoken, or Lisa has finally been heard. None of those things have happened. None of them will happen in the next episode either. But the family will be on the couch. The house will be full. Evergreen Terrace will look exactly as it always looks on the Sunday evenings. You have been visiting it for however long you have been visiting it. And for the duration of the episode, the loop will hold. The dream will run, the timeline will float, the town will not change. And you will be able to go home. We will be here. The town that votes to forget. Springfield as collective organism. Springfield's most unusual characteristic is not the radiation or the impossible geography or the billionaire who cannot die. It is the collective behavior, the way the town operates, not as a collection of individuals making individual decisions, but as a single organism managing its own survival through consensus mechanisms that most communities would be too embarrassed to acknowledge in daylight. Real communities do this. Every community does this to some degree. The difference is that real communities do it invisibly, through the slow drift of what gets remembered and what gets forgotten, through the social pressure that discourages certain topics, through the reputation management of public institutions that rely on their own continued legitimacy. It happens in the background, in the gap between what occurred and what the community's official record says occurred, in the difference between what the newspaper printed and what the neighbors actually know. Springfield does it in the foreground. With a vote, with a judge, with a railroad car. The Principal and the Pauper is the rarest thing in television, a show that makes its own structure visible and then comments on that structure within the same episode. It does not break the fourth wall. It does not step outside its own fiction. It stays completely inside Springfield and Springfield's logic. It just shows you Springfield's logic operating in real time rather than off-screen. The vote to keep Tamzarian is not a vote about Tamzarian specifically. It is Springfield voting to be Springfield. It is the community affirming its relationship to its own preferred version of reality. The real Seymour Skinner represents the kind of truth that Springfield's operating system cannot accommodate. He is a fact that does not fit the established narrative. And established narratives in Springfield are defended with the same vigor that buildings are defended in other communities, with legal force, with exile, with the creation of a criminal category for people who insist on the truth after the community has voted not to hear it. This is not unique to the Skinner episode. It is the pattern of the entire show. Homer works at the plant, and the plant is poisoning him, and the town and Burns knows this, and Homer cannot connect the dots. If Homer could connect the dots, Springfield's social operating system would produce the same response it produced to Sergeant Skinner. Homer would be told he is wrong. He would be invited to reconsider. If he persisted, social pressure would be applied. If he persisted beyond that, some version of the railroad car would appear. Burns has more resources and more subtle mechanisms of enforcement than Judge Snyder does, but the principle is identical. Communities protect their operating narratives because the alternative is too costly. The alternative to Springfield's narrative that the plant is safe and Burns is merely eccentric and Homer's intellectual limitations are a personal quirk rather than an environmental product is the narrative that the plant is poisonous and Burns is a criminal, and the intellectual limitations of the population are the predictable result of decades of deliberate contamination. The first narrative allows Springfield to continue functioning as it has been. The second narrative requires an accounting that would dismantle everything the community depends on for its material survival. Communities choose continuity over accountability when the cost of accountability is too high. This is not a moral failure unique to Springfield. It is a description of how human communities actually function when confronted with the kind of systemic problem that does not have a solution that allows the current arrangements to remain intact. The solution to Springfield's situation, the actual solution, the one that would address the contamination and hold Burns accountable and restore the cognitive capacity of the population and produce a town that did not vote to exile its own truth-tellers. That solution would require dismantling the plant, which would require dismantling the economy, which would require the community to face a period of genuine precarity and uncertainty whose duration and severity nobody could predict. Instead, the town votes to forget. The vote is not stupid. It is rational, within a specific and limited definition of rationality. It is the choice that costs the least in the immediate term. It is the choice that allows the structures that currently sustain life in Springfield to continue sustaining life in Springfield. It is the choice that does not require anyone to face a situation they do not know how to navigate. It is the comfortable choice, and communities are oriented toward comfortable choices, and there is nothing uniquely wrong with Springfield for making the comfortable choice consistently. The only difference is that Springfield makes the comfortable choice with unusual transparency. It does not pretend to choose the truth and then quietly suppress it. It votes to suppress it. It makes the suppression official. It criminalizes the truth and exiles the truth-teller and calls it democratic. Most communities achieve the same outcome through subtler mechanisms. Springfield's mechanism is just unusually visible. In the one episode that chose to show it rather than do it off-screen, this visibility is what the audience responded to with such discomfort. Not because the vote was wrong. The audience votes with Springfield every episode they watch the reset and accept it and come back next week. The discomfort was the recognition. The episode showed the audience doing what they have always been doing, which is choosing the comfortable fiction over the uncomfortable truth, and it did it explicitly enough that the choice could not be denied. The audience was being shown itself voting for Tamzarian, choosing the principal they know over the veteran they don't, choosing the Springfield they have already invested in over the Springfield that might be different. The discomfort was the mirror working. Springfield's greatest trick has always been making the audience complicit in its own denial while making that complicity feel like entertainment. The principal and the pauper made the complicity visible. The audience punished the episode for it, which is, of course, exactly what Springfield does to people who show it the truth. What Bart's rebellion is actually for. Bart Simpson has been described many ways over 36 seasons. The show's id, the avatar of childhood chaos, the kid who will not be told what to do, the natural counterweight to Lisa's superego. The reason the show was controversial in its first seasons, when parents worried that his irreverence toward authority would corrupt their children. The kid who tells authority figures to eat his shorts and means it every time. But Bart's rebellion is not random. It is not the undirected chaos it appears to be at the surface level. It has a consistent target. Bart does not rebel against everything indiscriminately. He rebels against the specific systems that try to control him without earning the right to control him. Against authority that is not legitimate. Against rules that serve the rule maker rather than the person being ruled. Against the expectation that he should behave in ways that benefit the institution at his own expense. This is a very specific kind of rebellion, and it is politically coherent in ways that the show never quite states directly, but that are visible in the pattern of what Bart challenges and what he accepts. He challenges Skinner because Skinner's authority in the school is not grounded in any principle Bart can recognize as genuinely applicable to him. He challenges the rules when the rules exist to serve the institution rather than the students the institution ostensibly exists for. He does not challenge things he recognizes as genuinely connected to protecting people he cares about. He is reckless, but he is not randomly destructive. His destruction has targets. In a contaminated town where the population's cognitive function has been compromised by the plant's discharge, Bart's rebellion is the only healthy response available. Not because rebellion will fix anything, Bart is 10, and his capacity for effective structural change is limited, but because the alternative to rebellion is the compliance that the system has spent so much effort producing in the people around him. Compliance is what Homer was shaped to produce. Compliance is what Ned's childhood conditioning was designed to ensure. Compliance is what the crayon maintains and what the radiation assists and what the collective denial infrastructure enforces through the social mechanisms we examined in the Tamzarian episode. Bart is not compliant. This is his most important quality. Not his mischief or his cleverness or his skateboard or his relationship with Milhouse or any of the specific attributes the show uses to characterize him. His most important quality is that the system has not yet managed to produce in Bart Simpson the compliance it has produced in every adult around him. He has not yet been broken in the ways the adults have been broken. He still pushes back. He still challenges. He still says, "Eat my shorts" to the people who want him to sit down and be quiet and accept the situation as given. He is 10 years old. He has been 10 years old for 36 years. The system has had 36 years to break him, and it has not yet succeeded. The floating timeline in this reading is not a curse for Bart. It is a mercy. As long as Bart remains 10, the system cannot progress through the stages of breaking him that it would eventually complete if he were allowed to age. The things that break people, the accumulating economic pressure, the narrowing of available choices, the death of options and the weight of responsibility, and the gradual erosion of the belief that things could be different, those forces require time to operate. Bart's 10-year-old status prevents them from having time. He will never get a job. He will never accumulate the specific kind of fatigue that comes from decades of making the compromises that sustain adult life inside an imperfect system. He will never have the choice removed from him that was removed from Homer by the combination of maternal loss and radiation and the grandpa deal. He will stay 10, and he will keep saying, "Eat my shorts," and he will keep challenging Skinner, and he will keep being the only person in Springfield who is actively, consistently, unreservedly refusing to comply. The loop gives him that. The loop protects that. As long as the loop runs, Bart does not become the person the system would eventually make him if it had enough time. As long as the loop runs, Springfield has at least one person who has not yet surrendered, who is still fighting, even if the fight is expressed as pranks and skateboards and an enduring refusal to be told what to do, who is still 10 years old and still saying no to the people who expect yes. That is what Bart's rebellion is for, not to fix Springfield, not to challenge Burns or shut down the plant or give Springfield the accountability it has never faced, just to be the one person in the town who is still pushing back. The one yellow face in the contaminated zone who has not yet been shaped into the compliant, manageable, damage-sustained form that the system's operation tends to produce in everyone it touches long enough. He will be back next episode, still 10, still fighting, still refusing to eat his vegetables and still eating his shorts. And Springfield will continue, and the loop will continue, and the plant will continue, and somewhere in a hospital bed, if the coma theory is right, a man will be dreaming about the family he loves, keeping them young and safe in the only heaven available to him. And we will watch. And we will keep watching. Because that is what we do on Sunday evenings. That is what we have always done. The yellow light at the end of Evergreen Terrace. There is a shot that appears, in various forms, across dozens of episodes of The Simpsons. The Simpson house at night, a warm light in the window, the neighborhood quiet around it, inside the family. Outside Springfield. Between the light and the darkness, a single pane of glass that is the entire distance between the warmth inside the house and everything outside it. This shot is not accidental. It is not filler. It is the show's most compressed statement about what it is trying to do and why. The light in the window says, "Here is the thing we are protecting. Here is what all the jokes and all the disasters and all the resets are in service of. This family, this house, this warmth. This specific, ordinary miracle of a family and a house on a street, alive together, imperfect and intact. Homer has been chasing this light since 1993. Since the vending machine fell and the coma began, if the coma theory is right. The light has been the organizing purpose of the dream. Keep it on. Keep the family inside it. Keep the house warm and the window glowing and the street outside quiet enough that Evergreen Terrace feels safe to be inside. That is what the dream is for. Not the adventures, not the celebrity appearances, not the increasingly surreal plots. The light in the window. The assurance that when Homer looks at his house, the light is still there and the family is still inside. The contamination theory says the plant is what keeps the light on. Burns controls the power supply. Homer works in the facility. The electricity flowing through the walls of the Simpson house and keeping the lights burning comes from the same plant that has been burning through the town's neurological health for decades. There is no version of the light in the window that is not also the light from the plant on the hill. They are the same electrical circuit. Homer's love and Burns's power running through the same wires, inseparable and irreconcilable. This is the show's darkest irony, and it is not stated anywhere in the text directly. It is implied in the geography: the plant on the hill, the town in the valley, the house at the end of Evergreen Terrace, the light in the window, the warmth inside that the family depends on. The source of that warmth is the same source that has been making the fish grow extra eyes, and the residents develop 4 fingers, and the cognitive function degrade in ways that keep everyone too impaired to look up at the hill and ask the obvious question. Homer is keeping the light on with the instrument of his own impairment. His job at the plant funds the house that holds the family he loves. His failure at that job ensures the violations continue, which ensures the contamination continues, which ensures the light can keep burning, which ensures the family stays warm. The loop that poisons Springfield is also the loop that keeps the Simpson family housed and lit and together. You cannot break one part of it without breaking all of it. The contamination and the love are on the same circuit. This is why nobody can fix Springfield. Not Mona, who tried and lost everything. Not Lisa, who keeps trying and keeps being ignored. Not Homer, who is constitutionally incapable of fixing something he cannot clearly see. Not the German investors, who came closest to breaking the loop and were driven out by their own financial limits. Not the EPA, which managed to contain the town temporarily but could not address what was inside the containment. The loop cannot be broken from inside it because everyone inside it depends on the loop for the thing they most need: the light in the window, the warmth in the house, the family intact, the Sunday evening always arriving. Burns built the loop, and Burns maintains the loop, and Burns survives on the loop's continued operation. But he did not build the need that makes the loop unkillable. He did not create the love that makes the light in the window worth keeping on. He just found a way to put himself between the love and its expression, between the warmth and its source, between Homer Simpson and the thing Homer Simpson most needs in the world. And there the loop runs. And there the light burns. And there the family sits, yellow and 4-fingered and imperfect and intact, on a couch, in a house on Evergreen Terrace, in a town that cannot be located on any map, in a loop that cannot be broken by anyone who loves what the loop protects. Which is everyone inside it? Which is all of us, watching from outside it, pressing play on Sunday evenings when we need to go home? The light is still on the show that never ends. The Simpsons will end. Every show ends. The characters will have their last scene, the music will play for the last time, the credits will roll on an episode that is, by definition, the final one. This will happen. The question is not whether. The question is what it means when it does. For a show that has run 36 seasons, a final episode is not just a creative decision. It is a cultural event with implications that extend far beyond the episode itself. The Simpsons ending means acknowledging that 36 years have passed since December of 1989. It means acknowledging that the family is not young anymore, not in the real sense of the word, even if the episode itself keeps them at their established ages. It means acknowledging that the thing that felt permanent was always temporary, and that temporary things end, and that ending is what all temporary things eventually do. The show has never pretended to be permanent. It has just pretended to be permanent for so long that the pretense has become indistinguishable from the thing itself. There have been seasons that felt like the end was coming, and seasons that felt like the show had found a second wind. There have been creative peaks and acknowledged troughs and the ongoing cultural debate about when it was best and whether it is still good now. Through all of it, through 36 years of that conversation, the show has continued. The loop has kept running. When it stops, everyone who has watched it will be older than the family inside it. The kids who watched it in 1989 as children are middle-aged now. The middle-aged adults who watched it in 1989 are elderly or gone. A show that has run long enough acquires a relationship to mortality that shorter shows never develop. The Simpsons has outlived some of its audience. It has been present through births and deaths, and the full arc of lives that have now concluded. It has been a constant in lives that are no longer there to experience its continuing constancy. This makes the floating timeline not just emotionally resonant, but ethically significant. The show that keeps its characters young while its audience ages is performing something for the people who watch it that goes beyond entertainment. It is providing a consistent point of reference in a life that is consistently changing. A place to go back to that looks the same as it did before. A Sunday evening that is always the same Sunday evening. A house that is always the same house. A family that is always the same family? When the show ends, all of that will be in the past tense. Springfield will have been, the family will have been, the Sunday evenings on Evergreen Terrace will have been, the light in the window will have been, and the people who watched it will be older than they were, older than Bart will ever be, older than Lisa will ever be, older than the children they themselves used to be when they first sat down on the couch to watch the opening notes play and the credits run, and Homer get chased out of the nuclear plant by a bouncing, glowing atom. Until that day, the loop runs. Until that day, the light is on. Until that day, the family is on the couch, and the couch gag plays, and Springfield is Springfield, and everything looks exactly as it did the last time you were there. It will look the same tomorrow night. And the night after. And every night you need it to. That is the gift. That is the whole gift. Everything else, the theories, the mysteries, the dark implications, the contamination, the coma, the conspiracy, the billionaire, the baby, the silence, all of it is just the texture of the gift. The way the gift is wrapped. The gift itself is simpler than any of it. Go home. They are there. The light is on. A final note. You have been in Springfield for a while tonight. You have walked through the contamination and the coma and the mystery of who pulled the trigger and the man who keeps living on schedule when he should not be alive at all. You have watched Maggie watching everything. You have followed Mona Simpson across 30 years of fugitive silence. You have looked at the town that cannot be found, and the timeline that will not move, and the community that votes to forget because remembering is too expensive. And somewhere in all of it, maybe, is the reason you keep coming back. Not the theories, not the mysteries, not the dark implications that run beneath the comedy like deep cold water beneath thin ice. The reason is simpler than any of that. It has always been simpler. The family is there, the house is there, the light in the window is there, and as long as you need a place to go when it is late and the world has been loud and you just need somewhere that looks the same as it always looked, Springfield will be there. Yellow and four-fingered and impossible and warm. That is all it has ever been. That is all it needs to be. Wherever you are watching from, whatever time it is there, whatever the night outside your window looks like right now, sleep well. Springfield will be here when you wake up. It always is. That is the whole point. Appendix. The evidence assembled. For anyone who wants the theories organized into a single reference, the key pieces of evidence each theory rests on, presented without the surrounding narrative. The radiation theory rests on 342 safety violations, radioactive waste on school playgrounds, Blinky the three-eyed fish, visible deviations in Springfield residents' biology relative to non-Springfield visitors. Homer's IQ of 55 by the creator's own statement. The undetected crayon, providing additional structural impairment. Burns's green glow as described in the Springfield files. The EPA dome classifying the entire town as a contaminated zone. Burns's deliberate rehiring of Homer, specifically after the German investors fired him. The geographic consistency of the four-finger and yellow skin characteristics among residents versus visitors. The coma theory rests on the April 1, 1993 vending machine incident in So It's Come to This. The explicitly stated 5% permanent brain loss. The immediate and sustained tonal shift towards surreal premises following that episode. The God conversation in Homer the Heretic, placed 6 months before the coma. The complete absence of any aging across every character in the show. The escalating absurdity of later seasons consistent with deteriorating dream generation. The celebrity cameo mechanism explained by ambient hospital media absorption. The show's own season 34 animated coma wake-up sequence and its subsequent retraction. The Burns shooting rests on 0 correct entry in the national contest from the randomly selected sample. The sundial as explicitly described by Burns as coincidental rather than deliberate. The DNA evidence pointing to any Simpson rather than specifically Maggie. Homer's season 18 on-camera confession. The fully animated alternate ending featuring Smithers. The early draft consideration of Barney Gumble. The reverse engineering of clues from a post-selected conclusion. The final shot of Maggie's trigger mimicry reading as memory rather than confession. The Burns immortality rests on the confirmed weekly radiation treatment described in the Springfield files, the Three Stooges syndrome as a precise description of disease equilibrium maintenance, Burns's functional cognitive capacity across more than a century of established biographical memory, Smithers's management of the treatment schedule as biological necessity, the plant as funding mechanism for the survival infrastructure. The Maggie intelligence theory rests on The Longest Daycare short and its Academy Award nomination as the show's formal acknowledgement of her capabilities. Multiple episodes depicting off-the-instrument intelligence scores, the deliberate restoration of baseline passivity after each demonstration of capability. The contrast with Lisa's visible intelligence as isolation strategy observed from infancy, the trigger mimicry as potentially memory rather than confession. These are the pieces. The theories are how they connect. What you make of the connection is, as it has always been in Springfield, entirely up to you. Sleep well. Good night.